How's that for a slice of fried gold?
You think this is a fucking costume? This is a way of life.
I'll be back.
Just a flesh wound. I'm not gonna hurt you. I'm just gonna bash your brains.
Take your sticking paws off me, you damn dirty ape!
I'm sorry, Dave. I'm afraid I can't do that.
It's alive! It's alive! It's alive!
I guess everyone's entitled to one good scare, huh?
Well, hello, and welcome to Cinema Shock. It's the podcast exploring the stories behind your favorite cult and genre films. We do all the research so that you don't have to. We're the guys telling you. This is awkward. We're the Todd's dead, everybody. No, I don't know how else to tell you. I really hope
dead to me.
Yeah, Todd. Anyway, we're the guys telling you everything you need to know about your favorite movies and the people who made them, so that the next time you're caught up in a nerdy movie conversation, not only will you know what is going on, you might actually be the expert. I'm one of your hosts, Gary Horne.
Hey, I'm co-host Justin Bishop, and yes, as Gary alluded to, Todd is no longer, well, that's not the way to say it. Todd's not here today. He'll be back. He wasn't here for the last episode because he had just had surgery. He is still kind of having a difficult recovery from that surgery. So he thought he was going to be able to make it today, but he was having a rough day, so we let him sit at home and soak in Epsom salt or whatever it is he needs to do. But so send Todd some well wishes on Twitter and all that, and Instagram and all that stuff. Say get well soon. Hopefully he'll be back soon. He won't be back on our next episode, but that's not because of this surgery thing. It's because he'll actually be traveling. He's doing that Trek convention in New York that he's been promoting for the last few several weeks here on the podcast. So yeah, it seems like it.
He was able to show up at the live event we did, so that was nice.
Yeah, so that was nice. He didn't do the intro with us, but he was able to come later on and hang out for a bit. But speaking of which, thank you to everyone who came out to the live event. It's as of this recording, it was just a few days ago, I guess, wasn't it? It was earlier this week. It was this past Tuesday at Coffee Underground in Greenville, South Carolina. That's our second live event that we've done with our friends at Gut Punch Cinema. Actually, it's our third that we've done with Gut Punch Cinema, because we did Nosferatu back last fall, but this was the second one of this cult class series that we're doing with them every month at Coffee Underground. So if you're in the South Carolina area or in Charlotte or Atlanta or somewhere nearby that's close enough to drive, keep those in mind. We will let you know about the next one very soon. But and if you're in driving distance, come on out, watch a movie with us, say hello, go have a beer with us afterwards. Go buy us a beer afterwards, whatever you want to do.
It's a lot of fun to watch some of these movies with like people. I will say right off the bat, this movie we're talking about today, I think it was enhanced tremendously by the fact that we watched it there. It was just fun to watch.
I agree. It's the first time I've ever watched it with an audience. I've never seen this movie in a theater prior to this event. It's always been an at-home experience, usually by myself or with maybe with one other person. But this is the first time I've watched it with a crowd, and you get different reactions. Reanimator, when we did that, was the same way. Even Nosferatu was that way. Like getting reactions from the audience where you wouldn't necessarily expect, or people laughing at places, things that are funny that you might chuckle into yourself a little bit, or maybe not at all when you watch it by yourself. But laughter and things like that are infectious. So when you see a movie in a live setting, it's a better experience as long as you've got a good crowd. And we had a great crowd. Everyone was super into it. It's not like going out on a Friday night to your local multiplex where people are fiddling around on their phones and talking and babies are crying and all that shit. Didn't have to deal with any of that because everyone's just there for the love of weirdo movies. So we're going to keep doing that. So keep an eye on our website and our social media and all that stuff.
And you might learn something. It's like a little shorter version of this, but Justin and I got to present the movie and talk a little bit about the facts of the movie that we're going to go deper on here.
Expand upon. Yeah. We're going to expand upon that today. So anyway, let's get into it.
Okay.
Well, one thing about that live show, though, this cult class series that we're doing is sort of about, as the name implies, it's about cult movies. It's about cult cinema. It's about cult classics. A lot of times when you're talking about the history of cult classics and cult movies, which is kind of what we do here on the podcast, you have a tendency to go back to the beginning of the cult movie movement. And we've kind of done that over the last few months as well, talking about stuff like Pink Flamingos and El Topo. We'll be talking about Eraserhead and the Rocky Horror Picture Show. Those are kind of the most commonly cited cult classics that you hear about as far as like the beginning of the cult movie phenomenon. And it's with good reason. Those movies paved a way for cult movies to thrive. They showed that a movie could be very niche and even possibly fail during their original theatrical run and still manage to not only find an audience, but to find a very passionate audience. And a lot of those films became cult classics based on word of mouth. And then as the video store became more popular in the 1980s, that word of mouth led to even more films finding their audience. Because in the past, someone might have, back in the 70s, someone might have recommended Eraserhead. Hey, you got to go see Eraserhead. This movie rules. It's unlike anything you've ever seen. But in order for you to actually see Eraserhead, you had to hope that there was a theater playing it at midnight somewhere near you. But then, come a decade later, in the 80s, with home video, someone could say, hey, you need to see Eraserhead. And you could just pop on down to your local video store and rent Eraserhead and watch it, assuming that you had a pretty cool video store that was stocking movies like Eraserhead. And these movies, they've had almost half a century or more in some cases to curate their cult following. And while many, many other cult films have emerged in the time since, that's, if they hadn't, we wouldn't have a lot to talk about on this podcast. But I would argue that there is no bigger cult film to be released in the last 25 years, maybe within my lifetime, honestly, than the one that we're talking about today. A film that kind of defines a cult film in the simplest way. It's a film that was largely ignored during its brief theatrical run, almost completely ignored. It was an absolute failure, in fact, but became a bona fide phenomenon when it hit home video a few months later, inspiring discussion, theory, obsessions, and philosophical debates. And the movie that we are talking about, of course, is Richard Kelly's 2001 sci-fi coming-of-age mindfuck, Donnie Darko.
It was as though this plan had been with him all his life, pondered through the seasons. Now, in his 15th year, crystallized with the pain of puberty.
So, why'd you move here?
My mom had to get a restraining order against my stepdad. He has emotional problems.
Oh, I have those too. What kind of emotional problems does your dad have? I met a new friend.
Real or imaginary?
Wake up, Donnie.
Imaginary.
I'm going to tell you a little story today about a young man whose life was completely destroyed by these instruments of fear.
I've been seeing stuff.
Donnie is experiencing what is commonly called a daylight hallucination.
I have to obey him. He saved my life.
Have you ever seen a portal?
Has he ever told you about his friend Frank, the giant bunny rabbit?
Like every living thing follows along a set path. And if you could see your path or channel, then you could see into the future, right?
What is going to happen?
I only have a few days left before they catch me.
It's weird to think about, but even for Richard Kelly, it might, if it weren't for this like cult status, he hasn't made a movie that was like some huge blockbuster. So it's just
no, not at all.
Which is kind of a spoiler, I guess, for his career as we dive in here. Speaking of which, we're going to have spoilers. That's what we do here.
Yes.
So if you haven't seen Donnie Darko,
you should see it before listening to this, or because it is an experience, especially the first time you see it. It's an experience every time you see it. Honestly, it's a different experience every time you see it. But I do feel like it's a movie that is best experienced fresh, unspoiled. So if you haven't seen it, as Gary was saying, we are going to spoil it. So we would recommend checking it out before listening to this podcast. We always give a spoiler warning at the beginning of the show, but every now and then you have a movie that you're like very serious about saying you really don't want this movie spoiled for you before seeing it. And I think this is one of those movies.
This is the beauty part of the podcast this time, is because, you don't want it spoiled for you. And if you're watching it for the first time and you don't know anything about Donnie Darko going in, you're going to want to listen to this afterwards so we can talk to you about what the fuck.
Yeah, because there's a lot of what the fuck involved. And if you have seen it, let's say maybe you were at our screening this past week, then you're going to hear a few of the same notes, but that was very much a Cliff's Notes version at that event. This is going to be like the real deep dive, and we're going to get into all the nitty-gritty on this, starting with director Richard Kelly. So Richard Kelly, he's only a few years older than us, Gary. How does that make you
Well,
feel?
I wish you hadn't just told everybody that, but sure.
Richard Kelly was born in suburban Virginia in 1975, and he wasn't born into like an artistic family. His mother was a teacher. His father was an engineer, literally a rocket scientist who worked on the Mars Viking lander project for NASA. But Kelly showed an artistic talent almost immediately as a kid, and his family, his mom and dad, they embraced that and they encouraged his interest in the arts. He was also a voracious reader, and he was especially a fan of Stephen King. King's debut novel, Carrie, which a novel we should probably note is about a troubled high school student for whom things do not go well. That was the first novel that Kelly ever read, according to him. That's what he claims. Although later in high school, as part of an accelerated English course, he was introduced to writers like Kafka, Dostoevsky, Faulkner, Camus, and Graham Greene, of course, all of whom he credits along with Stephen King with teaching him how to tell a story. He also read, or attempted to read, Stephen Hawking's A Brief History of Time in the 8th grade, but admittedly couldn't understand a word of it. And I got to say, I also tried to read A Brief History of Time, although it was later. I think I was maybe in college or late high school. I think I was in college. And I would also like to report that I didn't understand a single word of it.
It is Stephen Hawking was on a different level with his
smarter than us,
super interested in watching little people have sex according to the Epstein files, I guess, or something.
Yeah.
And so, yeah,
that's neither here nor
he's
there.
just on a different level. He had a niche, and he went with
he had several niches, some of which are worthy of discussion, and others maybe not.
Yeah. So anyway, time travel is tough for me, and we're gonna have to talk about it again today because Justin likes to torture me, I guess. But yeah, I get it, and you can totally see that he has the interest in this movie. I don't know how well it compares to A Brief History of Time because I don't understand A Brief History of Time mostly.
It's incredibly confusing.
I did want to say that, based on what you were just talking about with Richard Kelly, I made the joke when we were at the live show that this was directed by R. Kelly. And I thought that was funny, and Justin didn't. I just wanted to share that now.
I mean, it's not funny. It is technically true.
Speaking of people with specific niches, Richard Kelly, he was a reader, but like Justin said, he was also very into art. So he did have that artistic streak. Like when he was, one interview I saw, he talks about being 5 or so, and just like a lady down the street taught art for adults, and he was going to those classes and just at a young age learning how to draw, and like he was super into that. He was obviously an avid fan of his English classes and loved writing assignments. He won like a statewide writing competition in school. It was like a story he had written for like a short story or whatever. And he obviously he incorporates a lot of the school stuff in this movie because he remembers those assignments he got and the books he was assigned and that sort of thing, which he uses in Donnie Darko. So very formative years for Richard Kelly. For me, I wanted to forget that high school ever happened, but whatever floats your boat, I guess. Yeah, there was
it can be formative without being a happy time,
right?
Like it's formative in more ways than one.
Yeah, I know. Like one of the things in the movie, just for instance, is like the sparkle motion scene and them performing and everything. It came from like a competition that he took part in at Midlothian Middle School. According to like his mom, like he and 5 friends had a sketch group called the Minutemen, and they did something to like a Led Zeppelin song and danced around and acted crazy and stuff. And and she even says now that they were not great. There was a girl that sang right before them that really was very good, and somehow the Minutemen won, and the little girl did not, and said that she just remembers Kelly had felt really bad about that for a long time. Like he didn't want to hurt people's feelings. Oh, that's sweet.
That's very nice. Well, when Kelly was about 14 years old, he, as most 14-year-olds in 1989 would have been doing, he spent a lot of time watching music and videos on MTV. And one of those videos in particular really stuck with him. It was the video for Aerosmith's Janie's Got a Gun. And when he saw that video, he had kind of an epiphany. He could tell that the person who made the video had a vision. That's a movie. There's a quote from him. That's a movie, he thought, and I want to see that movie. You know, he had never seen a music video that told a story before, and he needed to know who the filmmaker was behind this vision. It just kind of fascinated him. Like, you know, most music videos were just, especially in the late 80s, it was just the singer lip syncing to the video in various locations, whereas a Janie's Got a Gun has like a narrative.
Yeah, I really wish there was some way we could connect this to a previous episode we'd done.
It would be nice, wouldn't it? So, so this was before MTV routinely put the names of the directors on the screen, which they would later do, where it would have the name of the video, the name of the director, and the name of the record label, I think. So they weren't doing that yet in 1989. So Kelly actually had to call MTV to try to find out who directed it. And he called over and over again. He's a 14-year-old kid calling, you know, this big corporation and talked to like 10 different people, probably just annoying the shit out of the receptionist at MTV. But he finally got the answer he was looking for, and that's that Janie's Got a Gun was directed by none other than David Fincher.
That's serendipity, right, Justin?
It feels like it. It feels like it.
You did not know that going in, did you?
No, I had no idea. I did not. It's just one of those weird little connections. But Kelly, he actually credits that music video with inspiring him to become a filmmaker. In the Donnie Darko book, which is this book that has this really lengthy, really great interview with Richard Kelly in it, he said, quote, "In Fincher's work, I saw an unparalleled level of craftsmanship that spoke to me in my hope and dream of expressing myself artistically. I don't know why it was that video, but it was. It inspired me to make movies."
Other than that stuff I could find with it, and I just still think that's awesome that it was David Fincher and just perfect timing. But he says he was influenced, like he only had one interview, he said his two biggest influences movie wise were like Romancing the Stone and Terminator at first. And because he said really he just only had access to blockbusters for a while.
Yeah, I mean, he loves Steven Spielberg, he loves James Cameron, you know, he cites those guys as big, and Ridley Scott I think is one that he's cited, you know, the guys who are making, you know, they're not art house indie filmmakers.
Terminator, I can see having some impact here, so that kind of makes sense. Now, he does say also that his parents introduced him to Alfred Hitchcock Presents, that he did like watching that, and then eventually his parents took him to one of their theaters near them when they had, and he saw Vertigo and Rear Window, that he still distinctly remembers those. And like other directors, apparently, like when you see stuff with his parents, in one article I was reading, they said that he did dabble with shooting stuff as a kid, like he borrowed a camcorder and was doing some of that stuff. So he kind of shares that thing we're used to seeing. But as far as filmmaking goes, like his parents kind of say, his brother actually tells a story. He says like he was kind of into everything. Like he fiddled around with athletics, he fiddled around with writing, he did this and that. He tells the story of he said one time our parents bought a box of Krispy Kremes, like a variety of Krispy Kremes in the box, and when we got to it finally to open it and eat it, Richard Kelly had gone in and taken a bite out of every single donut. He said that's kind of a metaphor for how he was. Like he wanted a piece of everything.
Wow, a dick?
Right.
That's a dick move.
Yeah. But they said it was kind of weird that, like, you know, once he realized filmmaking was he even says he was kind of embarrassed to tell anybody because it just seemed like the impossible choice out of everything he'd tried or messed around with. Then eventually his parents were just like shocked because he's just like, you know what? I think I want to move to Southern California. They were like, as far west as he had ever gone was Texas to visit his grandma. And so now all of a sudden he was like dead set. This was it.
Yeah. So after high school, that's what he did. He got a visual arts scholarship, moved out west to attend the University of Southern California. But before long, he actually dropped that art major and became undeclared, and then began taking some film classes. So in these film classes, and of course, taking film classes at University of Southern California is a pretty big deal. It's got some pretty noteworthy alumni, you could say. Right. So in college, he made a couple of short films. He did a little 8mm film called The Vomiter, which is about a guy who just, can't stop puking and it ruins his life. There's one called The Goodbye Place, which you can actually watch on the Donnie Darko Blu-ray that I have, has the Goodbye Place as a little special feature. And then another one called Visceral Matter. And Visceral Matter, he kind of made, it's kind of partially in film school, but kind of finished it after school was done, I think. But Visceral Matter is particularly important to the story of Donnie Darko because it was on that short film that Kelly first worked with producer Sean McKittrick and editor Sam Bauer.
I think probably the reason that The Goodbye Place is on there is because he talks a little about how, like you said, famous alumni from USC and just how tough USC was. He said they'll let you know you suck real quick as you're doing stuff. But he did the Goodbye place, and I think it was a big moment for him where he thought, I can do this, because he remembers like everybody just being really positive. He won like the James River Festival of the Moving Image for it or something. And like he said he had like his main professor that he looked up come up to him and said, "You're really a legit director now. Like, this is for real."
Yeah, and I tried to find a copy of Visceral Matter, and I couldn't find it anywhere. I've even found Reddit threads of people asking, where the hell can I watch Visceral Matter? So it's nowhere on the internet, it doesn't seem like. Yeah, I don't know why, because it sounds pretty cool. Because he talks about it in that interview in the Donnie Darko book. It was like his play on, like, he describes it as like a mystery science theater type, like the type of movie they would riff on, but done well, like but still sort of purposely bad acting and cheesy special effects, but cheesy special effects done on like meaningfully. Almost, it made me think of like how the special effects in Mars Attacks kind of look purposely fake, you know. That's kind of what it made me think of. But he went through a lot to get it made. But yeah, and Sean McKittrick was very integral in helping him get that one made. So they became really close. And then after graduating college, McKittrick and Kelly both started seeking out jobs in the film industry, and McKittrick got a job working as an assistant for New Line Cinema, who comes up a lot on this podcast because they are very integral to the cult film movement. While Kelly got a job as a client's assistant at a post-production house where he was essentially a gopher for all the directors and rock stars who'd come in to work on music videos there. And eventually he's just started thinking, what the hell am I doing? Like, what am I doing with my life? He knew that he wanted to have a career in film, but he knew that if he wanted to do that, he needed to get the ball rolling, and making cheese and cracker plates and getting food for Weird Al Yankovic, as he puts it, wasn't exactly doing the trick. So he decided to take a stab at writing a feature-length screenplay, which is something he had never done before. He had written these short films. He had never written a full-length screenplay. He says that he never even took a screenwriting class in college at all. So he just decides, I've got to write something. And then in October of 1998, he did just that. He sat down and he just started writing. Pumping out the first draft of the screenplay for Donnie Darko in just 28 days.
For what it's worth, I mean, I still think that I aspire to fetch Weird Al Yankovic cheese and crackers. So
yeah. I mean, I think that sounds like a cushy job. Honestly, I would. Although Weird Al is a vegan, so it would be like fake cheese.
Yeah,
maybe he wasn't a vegan back then. I think he was though.
I also just called
maybe
him
the cheese
Yankovic,
was for like,
which I used to do as a kid, and I thought I'd kicked it, but I guess not.
You were regressing. So when he first set out to write Donnie Darko, Kelly hoped to write something ambitious, personal, and nostalgic about the 1980s, a script that, in his words, quote, pushed the envelope by combining science fiction with a coming-of-age tale, which, I don't know, that doesn't sound like pushing the envelope. That sounds like you're making E.T. to me, which was one of his favorite movies when he was a kid.
But if you hear him in the commentary, what's interesting is like the bike riding scene and everything. He just says he acts like that's entirely coincidental. Like did not mean for
bullshit. Bullshit. This movie has Steven Spielberg's DNA all over it. Like his fingerprints are all. It's got fucking Drew Barrymore in it.
That's a great point. Yeah.
which was not intentional. I mean, that we'll talk about how she got involved, but still, I mean, you had to be aware. Come on.
Yeah.
So the seed for the script came from a news story that he had heard about as a kid. One that he later claimed may have actually just been an urban legend, but he remembers hearing about it. You know, it was a story about a large piece of ice falling from the wing of an airplane and crashing through a boy's bedroom. And the boy wasn't in his room at the time, so he escaped certain death. So this idea kind of got Kelly's wheels spinning. He thought, what if instead of a piece of ice, it's an actual plane engine, which led to, well, what happened to the plane? Which led to, what if they never found the plane? And that was kind of the central mystery from which his story would grow. And he built the rest of the script with the aim of resolving the mystery at the end. Although he did already know when he sat down to write it, he knew in his mind that the jet engine would be from a plane that Donnie's mother was on and that it was from an alternate dimension. So he kind of had these ideas in place. So his ideas on time travel and alternate universes were inspired, of course, by Stephen Hawking's A Brief History of Time. Presumably in the years since he first attempted to read it in 8th grade, he'd had time to actually finish it. Maybe he read the Cliff's Notes. Do kids even know what Cliff's Notes are these days? They just read the Wikipedia article.
Or Sparks Notes.
Cliff's Note. or Sparks Notes or any of that stuff. So, but other elements of the story to this script were inspired by Kelly's own upbringing in middle class Virginia. He grew up in the suburbs of Richmond, Virginia. So one of the things that he pulled from his actual childhood was grandma death. They had an old lady where in the town that he lived in, an actual person that she would come out and check her mailbox, and they called her grandma death. So that was based on an actual real person.
Wow, kind kids.
Yeah, really. Yeah. Kids are assholes. I mean, come on. Now, Kelly knew when he sat down to write this, like I said, he didn't take any screenwriting classes in college, so he knew nothing about screenplay structure. He actually kind of credits this as helping him in the writing of Donnie Darko because he never had any reason to really second guess himself. He never was aware that he was doing something unconventional. He just started writing and the story just kind of flew out of his brain and onto the page with no regard as to how a screenplay is, quote unquote, supposed to look. Now, I also think Donnie Darko, I think it really benefits from the fact that he had no idea how a script is supposed to work, because if he had, then I think he would have probably second guessed not just the structure, but some of the narrative choices that he makes in the film, which in my opinion would have created something far less unique, because there's something about Donnie Darko that, for lack of a better term, seems a little off. Does that make sense? Like, it just seems a little odd. There's something a little odd about it. And not just the story and things like that, just the whole feel and vibe of the film just feels a little bit off from what you expect from this kind of movie, from any kind of movie. And I mean that in a good way. That's not disparaging towards the film. I actually think that's a positive for this film. I mean, Kelly's obviously channeling his influences, everything from David Lynch, John Hughes, and Spielberg movies to Philip K. Dick, Kafka, and Stephen King, all the stuff that we mentioned earlier. But he's putting all of those things in a blender, and what's coming out on the other side is something completely singular, something that feels unlike anything else that's ever been made, I think. I mean, this is a very unique film, and honestly, something that hasn't ever really been duplicated, including by Kelly himself, which is a subject we'll talk about later.
Yeah, it's McKittrick says in one interview I read that he would like lock himself up in the room for like 5 to 6 hours a night and write. Like, he said it was totally free form. Like you said, no second guessing, just that I'm going to write whatever comes out and I'm not going to stop. And when it's over, if there's a problem, I'll figure it out. Or will he? Will he figure it out? I don't know.
So he showed this first draft, which came in at about 150 pages, to his friend Sean McKittrick. And McKittrick saw a lot of potential in the script. He said he'd never read anything like it before. And so he kind of helped Kelly refine the script. And after a couple more drafts were written, which shrunk the length down to about 128 pages, McKittrick used his connections at New Line to get the script distributed to agencies all around Hollywood. So as the script circulated, it started getting a lot of attention. People just, they read it, they really liked it, and McKittrick and Kelly started taking meetings around town, trying to sell the script. But despite the good reception the script was receiving, they had a really tough time convincing anyone to buy it. This was a very odd, ambitious, and frankly intimidating script, one that was really hard to categorize and thus hard for studios to sell to audiences. Any of these movies that kind of walk the line between genres and things like that are very hard, it seems like, for studios to sell. And on top of all that, Kelly insisted on directing the script himself. And not a lot of studios were willing to give the reins, and not to mention millions of dollars, to an unproven, inexperienced 23-year-old director. But like I said, Kelly's writing impressed people, and he kind of became the flavor of the month. Everyone wanted to meet with him. Everyone was impressed by him, but nobody really wanted to buy what he was selling. The Donnie Darko script just kind of became known around Hollywood as the great unfilmable script, and was considered more of a great writing example, that showcased Kelly's talent. They're like something you show to get a job to write another screenplay, but not something that many people actually wanted to make.
Yeah, that's weird. It seems like maybe they just were like, kind of what you're saying is like they were like, well, this kid can write something, but maybe it's not this thing. Maybe we don't make it this, but I don't know. It's weird to meet with them and not do it, or be so impressed with the script and think it's unfilmable. But I even remember, they talked about McKittrick and Kelly were saying that like one of the times they got furthest along in like one of those conversations, it ended up the guys just were like, okay, you can't direct it. Let's get somebody else to direct it, and we'll just do a little bit of a rewrite. We'll turn this into like a teen horror film. That's what we think is going to work, you know?
They Frank the Bunny to be a slasher
Yeah,
killer.
or something like that. Yeah, exactly. And so it's like, okay, why are you interested? I don't know. To me, that's just still weird. Like, you're so interested by this script, yet you want to rewrite it.
Completely change it. Yeah. Which is a weird thing, but is very common in Hollywood. Now, I do think they might have had a better chance of selling it had he been willing to let somebody else direct it, you know? And who knows what his career might have looked like if that had happened. Maybe he would have been able to direct later on down the line. I don't know. It's weird because I guess it would depend on whose hands the script got in. And if they turned it into a good movie, you know, and if they had not, his career could have been dead right from the get-go. You know, there's a lot of screenwriters who have written one script that got made and it was a bad script, or it was a good script, but a bad movie. And then they kind of tanked their career. So who knows what would have happened in that alternate universe?
Well, maybe there's like a parallel universe that
maybe there's a tangent universe where,
right.
Anyway, so there was a turning point in the film's development that came along when two guys named John Campisi and Rob Paris took an interest in the script. Campisi and Paris were agents with Creative Arts Agency, CAA, possibly the biggest, most influential agency in Hollywood. And they were really impressed with his talent. And based on the strength of the Donnie Darko script alone, they signed Kelly on as a client, which is honestly insane. And Kelly even says, he's like, my mouth just dropped open. I could not believe that I was getting signed to CAA after writing one script. But that's what happened. And having CAA's stamp of approval greatly increased the film's chances of getting made and led to meetings with some very influential people in the industry, including producer William Horberg, Ben Stiller, and Francis Ford Coppola. Kelly actually, he talks about this meeting with Coppola a lot in interviews because he found it to be a pretty important one to him. During that meeting, they're meeting at American Zoetrope, their office, which is Francis Ford Coppola's production company. They're meeting there, and they're in Los Angeles. And during that meeting, Coppola pointed out one specific line in the script. It's a line that's spoken by English teacher Karen Pomeroy. And that line is, the kids have to figure it all out these days because the parents, they don't have a clue. So according to Kelly, Coppola closed the binder that had the script in it and slid it down this big conference table and very dramatically said, that's what your whole movie's about right there. He had circled that line, you know? So while that meeting with Coppola proved to be very motivating and inspirational for Kelly, it didn't actually do anything to help get the movie made. American Zoetrope still didn't buy the movie.
Coppola's this is what your whole movie's about right here. I hope somebody makes it someday.
So, but these meetings went on for a year, you know, and nothing's happening. It's just for a year they're taking meetings. And I think he's still working at the post-production place during all this. So nothing ever comes to fruition. After a year, Donnie Darko, for all intents and purposes, was dead. It was considered a dead project. You know, it was something where it wasn't impossible necessarily for Kelly to get another job because people liked his writing, but Donnie Darko itself was done. And that all changed in early 2000 when Jason Schwartzman showed an interest in the script. But once word got out that Schwartzman, who was, you know, this is 2000, so he's hot off of Rushmore. Rushmore came out in 98, really became a hit in 99 or so when it hit video, you know. So people want to be in the Jason Schwartzman business, which is not something you can necessarily say now. I like Jason Schwartzman, but he's not selling movies. Right. But at the time, Rushmore was a big deal. So he's interested in the script. He wants to play Donnie. And once word got out that Schwartzman was interested in this, the whole project kind of springs back to life. And all of a sudden, people start coming out of the woodwork. And before you know it, Kelly and McKittrick had an offer from a company called Pandora to finance the film for $2.5 million. So they're willing to let Richard Kelly direct it. They're willing to pay $2.5 million. Jason Schwartzman is on as Donnie. So all of a sudden, this movie is alive again, and it's going to get made. Then Schwartzman's agent sent the script to a producer named Nancy Juvonen, who co-owned a company called Flower Films. Juvonen read it. She was on a plane to Las Vegas. She was going to Show West, which is the annual theater owners convention that happens in Las Vegas every year. And so she reads the script on that plane, loves it. When she gets to Las Vegas, she hands the script to her producing partner, who is Drew Barrymore. They own Flower Films together, and Barrymore read it. Barrymore loved it as well, and they actually tracked down Kelly's agent, who was also attending Show West, and they accosted him to let him know that we want to be involved in this. We want to be involved in this movie. We want to help Richard Kelly get this movie made. So 2 days later, Richard Kelly, who not too long ago was just a struggling screenwriter trying to sell spending a year trying to sell a movie and not being able to sell it. All of a sudden, within a span of days, 2 days later, after this Show West convention, Richard Kelly finds himself on a film set where Drew Barrymore was filming Charlie's Angels. So it's got to be whiplash for this kid. He's 24 years old at the time.
Yeah, imagine that.
24 years old.
You're likely a stoner, and then you're just like living life, just hoping one day your screenplay gets made, and then all of a sudden you're like in Drew Barrymore's trailer.
You're in Drew Barrymore's trailer, taking a meeting about this with a big movie star.
Yeah.
So they meet about Donnie Darko, and he actually asked Drew Barrymore, "Hey, do you want to play Karen Pomeroy, the English teacher?" And she was on board. She's like, "Absolutely, I would love to, but with one caveat." She's like, "I'll play the character if you'll let Flower Films come on to help produce the film and help finance the film." So those two things kind of went hand in hand. Kelly, of course, agreed, because why would you not want a star like Drew Barrymore in your little tiny indie movie? And with Flower Films on board, the film's budget increased. It almost doubled. It went up to $4.5 million. So they threw in another couple million. So now we've got $4.5 million to play with. So with financing secured, a start date was set in the summer of 2000 with the shoot scheduled to accommodate Drew Barrymore, because this was a kind of peak busy Drew Barrymore time. She had just made Charlie's Angels. She was about to go work on Penny Marshall's Riding in Cars with Boys. So she only had 1 week where she was available to work on Donnie Darko. Now, unfortunately, this caused an issue with Jason Schwartzman, who had another project lined up and wasn't available to film during the short window where Barrymore was available. Since the film's financing at least partially hinged on Barrymore's involvement, not to mention the clout that the film received by having a star of her caliber attached to it, Schwartzman was out. I guess Drew Barrymore was the bigger star, so if you're going to have to pick, you're going to pick Drew Barrymore, right? Plus, $2 million extra dollars, I guess. So that led Richard Kelly to have to search for a new star for his film. So Kelly and McKittrick, they start meeting with other potential actors for the role. They met with guys like Patrick Fugit, who had just done Almost Famous. They met with Lucas Black, who at the time, he had not yet done Tokyo Drift, of course, so he wasn't the megastar that he is now. But he was known as the kid from Sling Blade, basically. They met several times with Vince Vaughn, which seems weird to me, but Vaughn actually bowed out because he was 30 years old and he felt kind of uncomfortable playing a teenager, which I agree. Vince Vaughn has never looked like a teenager, I feel like, in the entire time that he's had a film career. Even when he was probably in his early 20s, I feel like he still looked older than he is. So I feel like Vince Vaughn was
just still looked like in his 30s or something.
Right. Yeah, exactly. They also met with Mark Wahlberg, who's only a year younger than Vince Vaughn, by the way. So he would have been like 29 at this time, which is still a little bit old for this role. But Wahlberg almost got the part, but he insisted on playing Donnie with a lisp the whole time. And Richard Kelly's like, "Come on, man. Like, we can't do that. That's going to be annoying and dumb if we do this the whole movie."
He was in his like going to be an actor phase.
So he's going to play with a lisp. It makes me feel like having a character with a speech impediment for no reason the whole movie is just like the little Nicky voice that Adam Sandler does in that movie.
Yeah.
It's so distracting.
It is
the whole time. That's all you can think about.
Oh, I just feel like Donnie would have like a lisp or something. Why is that so hard to understand? That's why Mark.
Now do that, but with a lisp.
How does one exactly suck a fuck?
That does bring a whole different level of hilarity to that scene, though. I think. Well, what do you think of these choices? Like the guys that we know were in the running for Donnie. Like, do you think any of them would have worked?
I don't know. I don't think so.
I don't think Mark Wahlberg or Vince Vaughn would.
Definitely neither one of them, and because
Patrick Fugit, maybe.
Yeah,
him I could see.
Because the same you said, like, Mark Wahlberg's only a year younger than Vince Vaughn, and I was thinking that anyway when I was thinking about him. I never felt like Mark Wahlberg looked high school young, maybe,
right. And he had just been in Boogie Nights where he's playing a porn star, so clearly an adult. So and he was very. That movie got a lot of press, so people, even audiences, would have that in mind, right? Like this guy just played Dirk Diggler, and now he's playing a 16-year-old.
Yeah, I mean, he was in Fear, and that was like 95, 96. And I think even then he's not technically high school. I think it's like college. Yeah, he's probably like supposed to be college age in like Reese Witherspoon's high school or whatever. But
right,
yeah, he just his film career. I don't think he's ever looked like a high school, and especially that kind of high schooler where Jake Gyllenhaal very much has that like slacker quality and like little skinny
sullen, like
just
not jacked up Mark
right,
Wahlberg.
exactly.
Yeah. I think it would have been weird. And Lucas Black,
I don't want to say anything negative, so we'll move on. But
we do love Tokyo Drift in this household.
Probably a reason he's not in all of them.
Right. That makes me think of like in the last Fast and Furious, maybe not the last one, but one of the recent Fast and Furious movies where it's like set right because the timeline of Fast and Furious is so goofy, you know, because of Tokyo Drift, because they set Tokyo Drift at a different point in the timeline. And so it's all weird. So there was one of the movies where it's him and Bow Wow show back up, and it's the one where they go to space, right? Because they're the ones making the rocket for the car.
Oh, yeah.
And that one's supposed to be set like 2 years or something after Tokyo Drift. And Lucas Black looks like a 45-year-old man who is, if he was 17 in Tokyo Drift, he should be like 19 years old now, and he looks grizzled. So that makes me think of probably what Vince Vaughn would have looked like as Donnie Darko. Honestly.
He's like a 45-year-old man. He's just like, sorry guys, I can't make the rocket. My dad's calling me home for dinner.
Also, they would have had to set this in Texas instead of Virginia because of that accent, or Alabama, where I think he's from Alabama.
I think it's Alabama or something like that.
Yeah. Anyway, so while the whole search for a new actor to play Donnie is going on, Jake Gyllenhaal was in town. He's doing auditions, and like many young actors his age, he got a hold of the Donnie Darko script, and in his words, found himself mesmerized by it. So he decided to audition for the role. Now, Gyllenhaal, of course, he's a big movie star now. We all know who Jake Gyllenhaal is, but he was not a household name at this time. Although he had spent much of his life on and around film sets because he came from a family of filmmakers. His father's a director. His mother's a screenwriter and director. You know, he grew up in Hollywood. Jason Schwartzman, oddly enough, was like one of his childhood friends. They hung out together when they were kids. So he'd always been around this stuff, even though he had not been in a lot of notable roles at this point. He had made his feature film debut as a child playing Billy Crystal's son in City Slickers in 1991, but he had actually appeared in very few films. His parents wouldn't let him appear in a lot of movies when he was a kid because they wanted him to have a more normal upbringing. They like made him get a job and all this stuff, you know. So other than a few movies where he made appearances and stuff his dad was making, like movies and TV shows, Maggie also popped up in a couple of those. Other than that, he really wasn't doing a lot of stuff in Hollywood other than existing there. But that all changed in 1999 when he landed his first lead role in Joe Johnston's film October Sky. So that was kind of the first time people became aware of Jake Gyllenhaal. That movie wasn't like a huge hit. I mean, but people saw it, but it wasn't like a blockbuster or anything. So he's not a big star yet. But he comes into this audition, and there's something about him when he walks in the room that immediately struck Kelly and McKittrick. He had what they kind of described as a Holden Caulfield type quality. Like there's something about this kid, like he could very easily like play a sullen, sad, troubled teenager. So he pretty easily got the part after that audition.
Yeah, he talks about that movie, just mesmerizing him. And, he was young then, but when you hear him talk about it now, he says it was because it felt like a Ron Howard or Steven Spielberg movie, and just had this like psychosis to it that he really dug. He talks about when he read it, for some reason, he remembered like stopping the car and reading the script and just thinking like, this is what my childhood felt like. He said, I've never actually spoken to rabbits or anything, but he was like, at this time, this felt like something I could relate to more than like, I think he said like most movies that were trying to capture my age group were talking about sticking things in pies. And this was different than that.
Right. And he was young. I mean, he was 19, I think, when they filmed. I think he might have turned 20 like during filming or not long after. Like he was practically right out of high school.
Yeah.
Now, Kelly certainly didn't have the clout to just pick and choose his cast members. He couldn't write a role for, Jack Nicholson and then cast Jack Nicholson as the dad. So like he just, nobody gave a shit who Richard Kelly was at this time. So they had to go through sort of the normal, typical casting audition process, just put out a casting call and hope that the right people show up and hope you pick the right people. Now, once again, Drew Barrymore's involvement did help a lot. When she signed on to the film, she agreed to work at scale so that, to help the film's budget, which motivated other actors to do the same. And that might be the only reason that they were able to afford a big star like Patrick Swayze, who plays the pivotal role of the motivational speaker / pedophile Jim Cunningham, Although Swayze had made strides in recent years to kind of upend his image in movies like Tu Wong Fu, Thanks for Everything, Julie Newmar, where he plays a drag queen. The Jim Cunningham role of all the roles in the film had been particularly hard to cast because he's a pedophile. Kelly met with other actors about the role, including David Hasselhoff, which would have been interesting. But very few actors wanted to sign on to play it because of the nature of the character. And it was actually Nancy Juvonen and Drew Barrymore who suggested reaching out to Patrick Swayze about it.
Yeah, I think I remember reading even Noah Wiley, when he first got cast, at one point he was scared because he was reading through things and just wait, am I the pedophile guy? He was
he thought that's the character they wanted him for.
Anyway, yeah, Patrick Swayze. This is I think the last prominent-ish thing I remember him in.
Yeah, because in the late 2000s, he did that TV show. He did
The Beast.
What's the name of that?
Yeah, TV show.
The Beast,
which ended early because he passed away, but
because he was sick. Yeah,
and he kind of did that because I remember at the time it was because he was well, the industry already thinks I'm dead. This is the only way to prove I'm still alive. Let me do something. And so
right.
But he does other stuff. I literally randomly put on this Alan Quatermain thing the other day that he was doing, and I don't even know why I put it on. I just put it on for the dogs and then caught myself watching it a little bit. But anyway, that was after this, but it was smaller stuff it felt like he was doing after this. Not that this was huge, but
no, I mean it became huge, but he didn't do anything really prominent. The highest profile movie that he did after this was probably, he has a cameo in the Dirty Dancing Havana Nights,
right,
as he plays a dance instructor, which is kind of an embarrassing thing for him to appear in, I feel like. But yeah, he didn't really do anything that you would seek out, let's say. I mean, honestly, in the years before this, I don't know, he had a weird... Patrick Swayze, I love Patrick Swayze,
Same.
obviously. You know I love Patrick Swayze. Who doesn't? But he had a weird career. After Point Break, he could have just gone on to be an action movie guy. He had the body for it. He had the look for it. He had the skills for it. He was a martial artist and all this stuff. But that's just not what he wanted to do. I mean, he did Black Dog right before this, which I don't think was a big hit, though, right? Black Dog wasn't a big hit, but Black Dog rules.
It's fun.
I don't know
if yeah.
It's great. Yeah, I watched it for the first time probably since I rented it, on VHS or something in the late 90s. I rewatched it, I don't know, in the last 6 months. It's been fairly recent, and I had a ball with it. I thought it was really fun.
Yeah. Patrick Swayze's done a lot of fun movies, and Jake Gyllenhaal talks about, because it hit me at the live show for some stupid reason. It just did not register to me that Jake Gyllenhaal was also, just as we're recording this recently, in Roadhouse, which is rebooting.
Oh, also Patrick Swayze.
Rebooting Patrick Swayze. And I was like, holy shit, I didn't even notice that for whatever reason. Anyway, but because of that, I was able to find some stuff where Jake Gyllenhaal ended up talking about Patrick Swayze and this movie, being in this movie with him. It's really sweet stuff to hear him discuss it. That he said when he first got on there, he was a little starstruck by Patrick Swayze, because the first thing he remembered about him was that Maggie had made him go see Dirty Dancing with her at the theater. Yeah. And they went 3 times in one weekend to see Dirty Dancing.
Wow.
And so he was so it felt like he kind of raised me a little bit. But he said that when he met him, he says he was the sweetest guy, that the biggest things he remembered about him were that he rode around set all the time on a Razor scooter. And so it would just be Patrick Swayze just cruising around.
He really seems in every interview I hear where somebody's talking about him, he seems like the sweetest, nicest, down to earth dude.
Yeah. And he said that, he was young, and this was a really big deal for him as a lead role, and that Patrick Swayze would sit with him and talk to him about stuff, and was just very supportive when he didn't have to even be there for
mentoring him. Yeah, that's really cool.
I like that. And you hear Richard Kelly talk about him, that this is a weird role for somebody like that, and he the pedophilia thing that you were talking about. Richard Kelly says they didn't know what to expect, but he came in and he was ready to, I think he literally says, take a flamethrower to his image. He did not care. He was fearless. So
he was ready. I mean, like I said, he had already played a drag queen a few years earlier, and that's a fantastic movie as well. But yeah, I think he's really good in this role too. He's very charismatic, even though you kind of get this, he's skeevy, but you don't know quite why, because there's something phony about him, about his enthusiasm.
Right.
When he's talking to the kids, you automatically kind of don't trust this guy, but you don't really know why. But I think that's something that requires a really good actor.
Yeah,
because he kind of makes you you don't like him, but you're sucked in by his charisma. You
Right.
know, and that's hard. That's hard to do, to be charismatic but still off-putting.
Right. He's definitely got this
Yeah.
like he's friendly and he seems like he's upbeat.
Well, he's one of those like people who like they're too friendly, like people who act too friendly to where you don't trust them because like nobody's that friendly.
Right.
Like you're hiding something. There's something like this is a false face that you're putting on, which in his case is, in the case of Jim Cunningham, is absolutely true.
Yeah.
But I love him. I love the like when he does the school assembly.
Yeah.
I quote that scene a lot when he says, "I said good morning." Like I do that to my wife a lot, which she gets very annoyed by, I think. I'll wake up before her, she'll get up and I'll say good morning and she won't say anything, and that will be my next slide. It's quoting Patrick Swayze from this movie. It's just one of those weird lines that pops up in my head all the time. But
I love that they even put like the little not subliminal, but like little Easter egg parts about like there's the kid that says something in the assembly, but he's the same kid that's in one of those videos that they
in the video, the I'm not scared anymore kid, right? It's that kid.
But he shows up at the assembly or whatever, like planted in the audience, you know?
Yeah. It's pretty funny and clever. So as far as casting for the rest of the Darko family, you've got Academy Award nominee and president of the 12 colonies of Kobol, Mary McDonnell as Donnie's mother, Rose. That is a reference that only the nerdiest will understand. You understand it, though.
Oh,
I know
do.
you
I
understand
never forget her.
I love Mary McDonnell. I love her in this movie. I love her in Battlestar Galactica. I love her in everything. I love her in, what did I just see her in? Fall of the House of Usher. She was great in. Did you see that? The Mike Flanagan series?
Yeah, I love that.
Oh, she's great. She's such a bitch.
She definitely has like I'm watching The Boys right now, and the girl who plays Stormfront too has this very nice way of being a bitch.
Yeah.
So they're very sweet sounding, but there's like an attitude behind them.
Yeah, she's not in this movie.
Yeah,
I mean,
not
she's not a bitch in that. She's bitching, but she's not a bitch.
Yeah.
That's another one of my often quoted Donnie Darko lines, which is said by Holmes Osborne, who plays the father Eddie. I love the parents in this. I think they're so cool. I love the way they're written. I love both of the actors. I'd probably never seen Holmes Osborne in anything else. I mean, I've seen him he's in Richard Kelly's other movies. He's in both of Richard Kelly's other movies. But other than that, I don't know him from anything. And I love him in this. I love that the parents are like, they're written as like Republican conservative parents, but they're still very supporting. Like their kids curse at the table and they don't care. They're not like Bible thumping Republican. You know, it's very complex. It's not like this black and white writing. I know. I just really like the way that
Kelly definitely
Richard
says
Kelly
that.
approached it.
And in the commentary, I believe he talks about how it was important for him to like he wanted there to be this different. He didn't want it to be a political statement so much as they just had differences of opinions, but they all still were there at the dinner table and they were able to be supportive of each other.
Yeah, they're able to just sit there and talk about it like civil, mostly civil until it gets into,
fuck ass.
which that comes from, I think, some friends of Richard Kelly's. He said like that they used to get in insulting arguments like in college, and they would just make up curse words basically, or make up curses. So like suck a fuck and fuck ass came from that. I think they would just combine curse words to make new curse words. So other family members, you've got Donnie's younger sister Samantha. She's played by DeVay Chase, probably best known as the voice of Lilo and Stitch, or as the creepy ghost girl Samara in Gore Verbinski's The Ring. And his older sister Elizabeth is played by his real life sister Maggie Gyllenhaal, who was actually cast in the film at Jake Gyllenhaal's suggestion.
So supposedly like an agent and Jake Gyllenhaal were talking about this, is my understanding of it. And then the agent even mentioned it to Kelly. And the one I couldn't think of at the live show that we did, I mentioned that Kelly was impressed by her willingness to drink urine in a movie. And that was Cecil B. Demented was the movie.
Oh, John Waters.
That she had drank urine in that movie. And he was like, I don't know, for some reason that's something he mentioned.
Did anyone explain to Kelly that probably was not actual urine?
Yeah, I don't know that he thought it was real urine. I guess he just thought she's...
I mean, granted, it's John Waters, so who knows? I mean, he has had his actor eat dookie, but I think by Cecil B. Demented, I think by Cecil B. Demented, he had probably gotten fake pee-pee for the set.
But really, the fun part of that is that Jake Gyllenhaal really wanted her in there too. Besides just having the nice sibling rivalry they could portray on screen, it was real too, because Jake Gyllenhaal says he thought it was funny that Maggie had pushed him to get into acting, and now she was going to have to be a supporting character in his lead role movie. And
it's such a little brother thing.
Yeah, he was saying, he literally in one interview said, quote, just imagine having your obnoxious little brother be the lead in a movie you're in.
So a few other actors who would go on to have long, successful careers appear in other supporting roles in here, including Jenna Malone. I think this was one of her first movies. She was like 15 or 16 when they made this. She plays Donnie's girlfriend, Gretchen. Noah Wiley, who we've mentioned, he was on, I think he was still on ER at this time, plays Donnie's science teacher. Beth Grant, great character actress, Beth Grant. I love her. She plays Kitty Farmer. She will forever be known as Sparkle Motion. To me, that's just what I refer to her as. Like, if she pops up in another movie, I'm like, hey, it's Sparkle Motion. But she's great. And Catherine Ross as Donnie's therapist, Dr. Thurman. Now, Catherine Ross is an interesting one. I'm sure many of our listeners know Catherine Ross is an Oscar-nominated actress who's probably best known for her appearances in films like, of course, The Graduate, where she plays Dustin Hoffman's girlfriend, Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, the Stepford Wives. You know, she's been in a lot of big movies, but she had mostly retired from acting full-time in the mid-'80s to focus on raising her daughter. So Kelly and McKittrick were sort of surprised when their casting director brought her up as a possible option for the role of Dr. Thurman. Now, there's a fun little story about how Ross got involved. So when their casting director suggested her, Kelly and McKittrick, they were intrigued, but in no way thought that Catherine Ross would want to be in their weird little indie movie. Like, she's a big deal. She's a movie star. But a meeting was set up anyway. You know, they're like, why not? Let's meet her. And they drove out to Ross's house in the Hollywood Hills, and they rang the doorbell, and Ross's husband answers. Ross's husband is the legendary Sam Elliott. So imagine you're a 24-year-old kid. You're driving out to meet already meeting a legend of Hollywood, and Sam Elliott opens the door.
Oh, you fellas here for Catherine? That was an awful Sam Elliott. What happened to me?
That was
in
not
my
good.
head, I
But
pictured
you know
it.
what?
I pictured his deep voice saying it so well, and it turns out it didn't come out that way.
Sam Elliott's a hard one that's a hard voice to nail down. It's another Roadhouse reference. How about that? So, you want to try it again? You try it again? Both takes are staying in the show.
I was thinking it over.
We're not cutting out the bad one if the second one's better.
Well, are you fellas here for? No, I don't think I got it. I don't know.
I think you're closer. You're getting.
I'm trying
there.
to get it because my
Practice
wife really in love with Sam Elliott. Thinks he's like the hottest older
Horny
guy
for
ever.
Sam Elliott.
So.
I mean, she's not wrong.
Especially Roadhouse Sam Elliott. Roadhouse Sam Elliott is just a stud.
Wade Garrett, yeah, he makes the panties drop.
That'll be a T-shirt on our online store soon.
Wade Garrett makes the panties drop. So anyway, Sam Elliott answers the door, like Gary says, "Are you guys here? You guys must be here for Catherine." And then proceeded for the next several minutes to convince them of all of the reasons why they should cast his wife in this role. So a few minutes into the meeting, it became pretty clear that Kelly and McKittrick and Ross kind of had different ideas of what the purpose of this meeting was, because Kelly and McKittrick thought they were coming there to try to convince Catherine Ross, the star of The Graduate, to be in their little movie. And Catherine Ross thought that they were there so that she could convince them that she was right for the role, when they were going to give her the role. I mean, it's Catherine Ross, you know. Yeah. But she's like trying to. So over the conversation, she's like, "Wait a sec, you want me in this movie?" And they're like, "What the fuck are you talking about? Like, you're like a Hollywood legend. Yes, we want you in our movie." So suffice to say, she got the role pretty easily at that.
That's
point.
pretty wild. You know, I also saw. I meant to mention earlier when we were talking about her for a second, but DeVay Chase. They said that like they had cast her, and then all of a sudden she also got cast in Spielberg's AI. They thought they were going to lose her, and then something happened during the process, and her role got cut out of AI. So they
I was about to say, I don't remember her in AI.
Yeah,
so.
but like whatever part she was going to play ended up getting cut out of the story. So she stayed with them.
That happened in this movie too. There was an addition. There was an art teacher role in this that Kelly had written. And over the course of them, like, looking over the script with the financiers and going over the budget, they decided that they could kind of cut this art teacher role because they already had two teachers that were kind of prominent, you know, the science teacher and the English teacher. And some of the stuff that some of the conversations Donnie had with the art teacher were kind of redundant. They were kind of repetitive. They covered similar ground to the conversations that he has with Drew Barrymore's character. So they decided to cut the role. They just cut it from the script, but they had already hired a guy. And they had to like tell the actor, sorry, like your role got cut. Yeah, I don't know who it was. Richard Kelly didn't, in the interview where he said that, he didn't mention who the actor was.
You already told everybody
at
that point too, like, oh, I got a role.
I'm going to be in a movie with Drew Barrymore, and then nope, you're cut. He probably still got paid a little bit.
Yeah.
So there is another notable cast member that I want to mention because I just like this guy is James Duval. He plays Frank, the bunny, both in and out of the bunny suit. He does play Frank in all the scenes where Frank appears, I think. And Duval is one of those cool character actors who he's never been famous, but he's made some very memorable appearances in a lot of well-loved, mostly cult films and a couple of mainstream ones. But he began his career in a couple of Greg Araki's early films, Totally Fucked Up and The Doom Generation, which if you have not seen The Doom Generation, it's so good, man. The 4K restoration is streaming on Criterion right now, so go watch it. It's him and Rose McGowan. It's such a good movie. So that's my recommendation for today. If you want another James Duval movie, go watch The Doom Generation. But he also showed up in small indie movies like Go, which was 1999, SLC Punk, with Matthew Lillard, Lucky McKee's May, which was a couple years after Donnie Darko, but very memorable role in that one, if you remember. I don't want to spoil May, but if you've seen May, you know who he is. And then he also had some supporting roles in bigger films like Independence Day, where he plays Randy Quaid's son. In that one, I think he's in Mars Attacks as well.
That feels
Isn't
right.
he in Mars Attacks? Yeah, I think he's in Mars Attack. Anyway, cool actor. I really like James Duval. There's a really good making of documentary about Donnie Darko on the Arrow Videos Blu-ray, and he's the only cast member that they talk to. They don't interview like Jake Gyllenhaal or anyone else really, but they interview him.
Frank the Bunny's the star
pretty
of the
regularly.
movie, so.
Yeah, but he's fun to listen to in that. I don't know if you watched that documentary, but he's very enthusiastic about this film. He loves it. So he had a lot of really fun insight into
I can
it.
see it. Even later on, nobody seems to know what this movie's about. So,
but Duval, he became interested in Donnie Darko around the time that Jason Schwartzman was circling it. Because he'd been a fan of Rushmore, so he wanted to work with Jason Schwartzman. So when he found out that Schwartzman was talking about being in Donnie Darko, he asked to audition for. He asked to read the script. He read the script, and then he's like, "I want to audition for the role of Frank," despite the fact that Frank's appearance in the script was he was described as being 6 feet tall with blonde hair, neither of which applies to Duval, who's probably about my height, and I think he's part Vietnamese, part Native American, part Irish. Like he's definitely not blonde hair, blue eyed, guy. He's got very dark skin, very dark hair, but he's wonderful in the role. I think I really like him in this, even though it's a weird role. But he does the voice and everything, and they like digitally manipulated his voice to make it sound that way. That's all James Duval. Every time you see Frank on screen,
I wonder if he sat around in the scenes with Jake Gyllenhaal. Just, bro, you're such a bummer. I was here for Schwartzman. You let me down, Jake.
It's funny, like both Richard Kelly and Jake Gyllenhaal kind of credit Jason Schwartzman as helping kickstart their career. What with Richard Kelly, it's because the movie came back to life when Jason Schwartzman became involved. Even though he ended up not doing the movie wouldn't have probably ever been made had he not almost been Donnie Darko. And of course, Jake Gyllenhaal's career kind of got started because Jason Schwartzman had to step away from the project. So they both kind of credit Jason Schwartzman in different ways as like kickstarting their career. Yeah. So a couple of other fun bits of casting before we move on. This was Seth Rogen's in this. This was Seth Rogen's very first movie appearance ever. And I was watching it this time and realized that Seth Rogen's very first line of dialogue ever in a movie was, "I like your boobs," which feels like a fitting start to Seth Rogen's career. Honestly.
It's like not a surprising trivia fact. That just seems like
it's not.
That makes sense.
Yeah. So he plays one of the bullies at Donnie's high school, and the other bully is played by a guy named Alex Grinwald, who is not really known as an actor, but Alex Grinwald is the lead singer of the band Phantom Planet, which Jason Schwartzman is the drummer, or was at the time the drummer for Phantom Planet. So that's another weird little connection. And he's really good in the role, I think. I don't know why he didn't do a lot more acting.
Was he connected because of Schwartzman, you think?
Nothing that I saw indicated that, but I have to imagine maybe Schwartzman like gave him a phone number or something, or said, "Hey, you should go out for this role," because that would be a really weird coincidence otherwise.
Yeah, very odd.
I love Phantom Planet. You like Phantom Planet? I saw him live once. Jason Schwartzman wasn't with them anymore by the time I saw them because he was busy being a famous actor. But I remember seeing them live up in Charlotte in a small little venue, and it was a fantastic show. I was
going to say, I don't feel like they ever became like a huge band, but everybody knows them if you were like, around our age, especially.
Well, everybody knows California because of the OC.
That song went all over.
Yeah. They were never huge, but they've made a pretty decent career. I've always loved Phantom Planet. I think they're great. Anyway, but he's great in the role. I think he's a really good bully.
They're real douchey.
Very, very douchey. Yeah. He is a piece of shit. So once Jake Gyllenhaal signed on, he kind of quickly became an integral part of the creative process. Like, he would come over to Kelly's house. He'd have notes written all over his script. They would debate and negotiate how they wanted to adjust every line of dialogue. And, this could maybe be obnoxious to some directors. Like, you've got this 19-year-old kid coming in thinking he knows how to rewrite this character that you've spent so much time on. But Kelly was receptive to it because he was very aware that he lacked experience as a director. So he actually kind of invited collaboration. Like, he welcomed it. He also knew that it was in his best interests to surround himself with crew members who were far more experienced than he was. So his key collaborators on the film, especially during the planning phase and the pre-production, were his visual team. He had his costume designer, April Ferry, who'd been working since, I don't know, the 60s as a costume designer, production designer, Alec Hammond, and cinematographer, Stephen Poster. Now, Stephen Poster was especially essential to the film's success. His career as a cinematographer dated back to the late 1970s, when he primarily worked on low-budget genre movies, including Dead and Buried. Remember Dead and Buried that we talked about a few years ago during our Dan O'Bannon series? He was the cinematographer on that one. But what really caught Kelly's eye when he was kind of looking over resumes of potential cinematographers was that Stephen Poster had shot Ridley Scott's Someone to Watch Over Me. And one thing we know about a Ridley Scott movie is that they always look incredible, right? And even if the movie's not great, they look great. Prometheus looks great, but that's the only kind word that we'll say about Prometheus on this episode. I'm going to rewatch that, by the way, before the new Alien comes out. I'm committed. I've already watched the first 4 Alien movies. I'm going to finish up the franchise. So one day, maybe my thoughts on Prometheus will change. Maybe this will be the viewing that things really click into place for me. You think?
I don't know, because the stuff you're hard on it about, I don't know that you're going to stop being hard on it about.
Oh, I mean, about every character being an idiot?
Well, just that there are dumb things that happen technically, but
we'll see. Well, I'll report back.
I still think the movie looks fantastic.
It does. It looks great.
It's fun.
It looks fantastic. Every Ridley Scott movie does, including Someone to Watch Over Me. So that's why when Richard Kelly saw that movie on Stephen Poster's resume, he's like, well, how could my little indie movie possibly afford to hire someone who shot a Ridley Scott movie? But at this point, it had been a couple of years since Poster had shot a feature. He had been spending some time the last few years doing music videos and commercials. He was still working. He just hadn't shot a feature film in a couple of years at this point. But Kelly still had to kind of persuade Poster to take the job. He had to get him to take a reduced rate, so he was getting paid less than he might on a bigger film. Now, there was a little bit of concern in bringing on such an experienced cinematographer. They were worried that he might try to steamroll the inexperienced Kelly, but Poster calmed those fears in their very first meeting. Like, he told Kelly in their very first meeting, he said, I want you to know 2 things. First, I want you to forget about the age difference between us. And second, I don't ever want to be a director, so don't worry about that. I won't try to take this film away from you. So that kind of helped Kelly. It put him at ease, that this guy who's been working in the industry since before you were born is going to help you out. During that initial meeting, Poster had Kelly dissect the script. They went over the whole script and dissected it. And he said to Kelly, well, this is actually a quote from an interview from Stephen Poster. He said, we read every word, every sentence, every page, every scene in the movie. I made him justify to me why he wanted that in the movie. I wanted him to be able to tell me what each scene was going to tell the audience. So it, again, became a collaborative process, as filmmaking, often is and should be, honestly.
I often think, the more we talk about these movies, that the guys can't get by without their cinematographer being right there.
No, they're a big part of it.
That's a huge part.
Yeah.
I wonder.
It's a visual medium, so the guy in charge of the visuals should be one of your key collaborators, right?
Right, exactly. Stephen Poster might actually be the person that knows more about this movie than anybody if he made him break it down like that.
That's true. Yeah. Maybe he can explain it.
Yeah. I was just thinking, I guess he's seen some stuff in his career, but I'm just like, what do you think he thought when he got to the Smurf scene?
Yeah, right.
Just explain this to me.
Yeah.
The Smurfs.
Why does the audience need to see this?
That scene I read too, that they had to go get permission from the creators of the Smurfs to use them for this thing, and
even just to mention it, really?
Yeah, and they were down with it.
Yeah, why not?
And they liked the idea of they were like, oh, you're right about the asexual nature of the Smurfs.
Thank you for clearing that up.
Yeah. And so they were okay with that, and then Kelly was super stoked about it. It's cool, let's get some Smurf dolls to shoot at in this scene, and then they couldn't find any. And
Wow. Yeah, not many people were making Smurf dolls in 2000. So getting Poster on board was a pretty big boon for the production, not only because of his decades of experience, but because due to that experience, he had connections. Connections that allowed him to shoot with equipment that a production of this size wouldn't have access to otherwise, or wouldn't have been able to afford otherwise. For example, Kelly knew very early on that he wanted to shoot this movie anamorphic. But shooting anamorphic is typically more difficult because it requires more light and more equipment, and which makes it more expensive. But thanks to Poster's connections, specifically his connection with Panavision, he was able to get the equipment that they needed at a greatly reduced rate. And that's honestly a big reason why the movie looks as good as it does. Now, of course, one of the key design elements for the film is the famous Frank the Bunny suit. When they started talking about this, and he had, some people start sketching out what they thought the Frank the Bunny suit should look like. Richard Kelly said that they all kind of look like the Easter Bunny, not the disturbing and animalistic character that Kelly had pictured in his head. He kind of thought this character should disturb the audience, make them feel uneasy when they saw it, like make them, when he pops up on screen, it scares you a little bit, So Kelly, who is an accomplished visual artist in his own right, he drew a few rough sketches of Frank's face, gave them to production designer Alec Hammond, who then fleshed out the design. Then that design was given to April Ferry, the costume designer, who built that fursuit from scratch and then hired a sculptor to actually create the face.
Frank the Bunny is probably the most iconic thing from this movie.
For
just
sure.
Like the image of Frank the Bunny.
Mm-hmm, yeah.
And so I guess it's more...
He's become the mascot, basically, of this movie.
Yeah. Alec Hammond, I guess, gets most of the credit for that, because April Ferry built the costume, which is awesome. I couldn't find anything else in her filmography that I was like, wow, she would be really good at making a Frank the Bunny costume.
No, but her filmography is pretty insane. Like, she's been working for a long time. She passed away a year or two ago, and she was in her 90s. I think when they made this movie, she was already pretty close to retirement age, although I do think she still worked on Kelly's next two movies as the costume designer.
She worked on The Box, she worked on Southland Tales.
Yeah.
She I think several episodes of Game of Thrones she was a costume designer on. So she's worked
a
at least
badass,
up until then.
Wow. So she would have been in her 80s when she was doing Game of Thrones, probably. That's insane.
I imagine she would be.
Man, I don't know. That's awesome. Good for her.
Maybe not having prior experience making a bunny costume was exactly what made it work. So
yeah, it turned out great. And Richard Kelly's drawings for the Frank the Bunny appear in the movie at the end, in the Mad World scene. When you see Frank's drawings where he's sketching out and planning the Frank the Bunny, those are Richard Kelly's drawings of it.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, that's pretty. They have a little cameo. It was also
back to his art classes, his art for adults classes.
Exactly. And so it was also April Ferry's idea to have all of the students dress in school uniforms. This was a practical decision because the production didn't have the budget to outfit everyone in these period 80s costumes, like you're used to seeing in movies like this. So this was kind of a clever workaround. And it was a great idea because she brought this idea to Richard Kelly, and he really liked it because it helped to portray the idea that Donnie was pushing back against conformity because everyone's dressed the same. And they're going to an affluent kind of private school instead of a public school. And I don't know, it works thematically, I think, that they're in a private school. And that was, again, just kind of a practical budgetary thing.
Cool to see it so collaborative.
Where a costume decision actually adds nuance to the story.
I was really hoping for her to design some Smurf costumes to just show that gangbang that they were talking about.
That gangbang will just always have to live in our minds and our imaginations.
I guess they're leaving us with blue balls. See what I did there?
I did. That's good.
Okay. All right.
So when it came time to shoot, the very first thing that they did, which is technically still part of pre-production, I guess, but the very first things that they shot on camera for the film were the Cunning Visions infomercials with Patrick Swayze, which were shot about a week before principal photography.
This is part of the selling point for Patrick Swayze, I bet, because all of those were shot on his own personal ranch and him wearing his personal clothes.
Yeah.
And so this is still 80s clothes that he had from other shit he did just hanging up in his closet. It really require a lot from him.
I know Richard Kelly tells a story about his wife, Patrick Swayze's wife, would come out going oh, I think you should wear the pink shirt with these pants. And she was helping him pick out the costumes, but it was all shit that he just still had hanging in his closet, which, I don't know why he hung on to him. Maybe he's nostalgic about it. Granted, I guess when they're filming this, that was only 12 years before, or 11 or 12 years ago was the 80s. And I definitely still have I have shirts in my closet that are at least 12 years old.
For sure. And I'm sure that Patrick Swayze has more than a walk-in closet.
He's
so
probably got more closet space than I do, yeah, on his ranch
Yes.
in California.
Him going through it all didn't happen very often until this very moment.
His wife
Also, maybe
knew it. His wife had cataloged it, maybe.
yeah. He probably also liked how broad it made his shoulders look. You know?
Well, yeah.
Just those,
Yeah.
those big old shoulders in the 80s.
So obviously that was shot at, like Gary said, at Patrick Swayze's ranch, which is in California. And although the film does take place in Virginia, technically, it was shot in and around the greater Los Angeles area. Most of it was shot at this place ironically called the Virginia Country Club, which is a neighborhood in Long Beach.
Nice.
But it's a location that is often used for films set on the East Coast because it looks like an affluent East Coast neighborhood. Like Ferris Bueller's house in Ferris Bueller's Day Off, which is set in Chicago, I think. That was filmed in this neighborhood. So like the outside of Jim Cunningham's house, Donnie's house, like all of that stuff was filmed in this Virginia Country Club neighborhood, which is in the greater Los Angeles area.
What a weird thing. What's the point of living over there if you're just going to look like you're living on the East Coast? Right?
I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. It's weird.
You just want the weather, I guess.
Yeah, well, that is, I guess, a selling point. And you're near Los Angeles if you want to, partake in all the things that it offers. What your neighborhood feels like a getaway, maybe. I don't know, man. I can't afford to live in that neighborhood anyway.
I was going to say you're living in, close to LA, but not like, where the heroin needles are. And stuff.
Yeah, right. No, out in the suburbs. No, it's all just good quality cocaine. no heroin.
But the high quality cocaine.
Yeah, good stuff, the pure stuff.
Right.
So the very first shot, when principal photography officially began, the very first shot we see of the very first shot they shot was the very first thing we see in the movie, which is Donnie waking up in the middle of the road. Although, and Richard Kelly tells a funny story about this. He was so nervous and excited when they did it that when the scene was over, he accidentally yelled action instead of cut, and everyone laughed at him. So he's like, well, I embarrassed myself on the very first day.
Nice.
It's a great shot. They actually had to do it twice because the Steadicam operator, there was like a shutter in the shot and it fucked it up. So they actually had to go back and reshoot it. They hired a new Steadicam guy and they redid the whole thing, but they had to get up there. And luckily all that like haze was still over the mountains, that look in the background, and they were able to duplicate it miraculously. But that was the very first thing they shot, was Donnie waking up on that cliff side, But then the shoot quickly moved to the scene set at Donnie's high school. And for those scenes, the production was able to use a private Catholic school they were shooting in the summertime, so the school was closed for the summer. Now, normally this would not be the ideal location to start the shoot, especially with a first-time director, since the high school scenes have the most moving parts, There's a much bigger cast all at the same time. Most of them are teenagers. But the decision was made to shoot there really, again, it's another practical decision. It was because of Drew Barrymore's availability. This was the week she was available. Remember, she was only available for the week, so they had to knock out all of her scenes in the first week of the shoot. Now, one of those first scenes that they had to shoot is also probably the film's most ambitious scene, and one that nearly didn't make it into the film, and that's that tracking shot through the school where we're introduced to many of the film's main characters. It's set to Head Over Heels by Tears for Fears. This scene was essential to Kelly, but the film's financiers felt that it was unnecessary because they said that it doesn't contain any dialogue. It doesn't seem to move the story forward in any significant way. They called it an indulgent music video.
And then also, they probably thought it was kind of ballsy to, hey, you're choreographing the entire thing to a song that you don't have rights to.
Right. Yeah. They didn't have the rights to the Tears for Fears song yet. So I guess he was just crossing his fingers, hoping that they would get the rights to it, and I guess
what do you do? You have to try to nail it down with something else, which could happen.
Yeah,
I saw a video of Dick Van Dyke dancing to some fucking hip hop song.
Oh yeah, Eggs Tyrone on follow Eggs Tyrone on Instagram. You'll see all kinds of that stuff. But they actually had to do that in this movie. The Sparkle Motion performance at the end was originally supposed to be a Pet Shop Boys song, and the Pet Shop Boys would not let them have it for less than like $100,000. but they had already
Oh, wow.
secured the rights to another song. I think it might have been the Tears for Fears song. They had gotten the rights to Tears for Fears, and part of the clause in that, this is weird, I never heard of this before, but this is the way they explained it. Part of the clause and when they got the rights was that any other song that they licensed for the movie could not spend more than they were spending on this song. So the Pet Shop Boys song was $100,000, which was more than what Tears for Fears was charging. But in the clause, the production was not allowed to pay more than for anything else than what they were paying for Head Over Heels. And the Pet Shop Boys people would not budge on that $100,000. So they couldn't use whatever song they were originally supposed to use. I think it's Weston. What's that song? That famous song, Weston Girls, Weston Boys by the Pet Shop Boys. Is that them? Is that the one I'm thinking of?
That sounds right. It goes with Duran Duran, I think is.
Notorious is what.
Yeah,
Notorious, which works, but they had to kind of edit that scene in a way that worked because they had choreographed it to the Pet Shop Boys. So if they hadn't gotten this Tears for Fears song, they could have done that, but the Tears for Fears song just works so well in that scene. I think it's iconic. It's an iconic moment.
Agreed.
And Kelly's original intent was to have this scene as a single unbroken tracking shot, all one shot, a oneer. But Stephen Poster convinced him that wasn't plausible considering the size of the location, the length of the song. He's like, he made Kelly go like walk the school with a stopwatch to see how long it would take, and it didn't work. The timing just didn't work to make this a one shot. So it ended up being broken up into like 4 or 5 separate shots. But they are shooting it all in the school in a 360-degree environment, which basically means that they had to light and dress the school hallway in a way to where the camera could turn around 360 degrees and not see lights and not see anything that resembled a film set, basically. So he had to light it in a way where, the lights were hidden if the camera turned around. They couldn't treat it like a normal film set where you can, remove walls and all this stuff. So that's how they did that. And they turned this school into a 360-degree film set. And then Kelly hid in one of the classrooms with a walkie-talkie, and he's watching the scenes on the monitor as they're shooting it with a Steadicam. And because they had planned on shooting all of the slow motion in camera, as opposed to like doing it in post-production, because Kelly doesn't like the look of post-production slow motion, because it does have a weird shuddery look, Kelly would have to call out camera speeds to the first AC, who was the only other crew member in the hallway other than the Steadicam guy, so that they would know like when to slow down or speed up the film. So he would say like, all right, we're going to 32 frames a second. All right, back to 24. Because when the movie slows down, that's them increasing the speed of the film. Now, when it speeds up, which it does a few times throughout that scene, that was done in post-production because that has a different look to it. But the slow down stuff, the slow motion stuff, he was really adamant about doing that in camera. Now, the point of this whole sequence was really to give us an idea of who each of these characters were without having them say a word, much like the film does in the opening sequence when we see that we are introduced to all the members of the Darko family, to the tunes of Killing Moon, at least if you've watched the theatrical cut. He had each actor in this school scene do something emblematic of their character, hoping to capture the essence of each character in a single moment. So when editor Sam Bauer, they shoot the scene, they send it to the editor, he puts together the sequence, and he had to cut the song really carefully so that the audience doesn't realize that there are actually about 2 minutes of that song missing from the film, which I would never have known watching the movie. I had no idea. I mean, I've heard that song a million times, but watching the movie, I never think, hey, there's like a big chunk of this song gone. But they cut it in a very good way to where it's kind of seamless. So Stephen Bauer, he cuts together this whole sequence, transferred it to a VHS tape, sends it over to the set. Kelly pops it in a VCR, TV VCR, I think, in one of the production trailers. And he plays it for the crew, including the financiers who had been trying to convince him to cut this sequence. And once everyone saw it put together with the song and everything, they knew that they had something special. They knew that Kelly had made the right decision by insisting on this sequence being in the film. So
pretty cool to have them admit that they're wrong.
Yeah, like, oh yeah, okay, you were right, dude. Like, you made the right decision, which probably gave him a boost of confidence as well. Because remember, he's never directed a movie before, so he's like spending this whole shoot trying to prove to people that he's got what it takes to directed production of
Right.
this size, you know? So I do want to talk a little bit about these music video sequences, if you want to call them that. So for a kid who grew up weaned on MTV and was inspired to be a filmmaker by a music video, like we mentioned earlier, it makes sense for Kelly to want to do something like this in his first movie. But that doesn't mean that these scenes are all style over substance. I think they are very important pieces of storytelling, both of them. Well, there's more than just these two, because there's the Mad World one at the end as well, which we'll talk about in a minute. But these are scenes of like pure cinema. They're all sound and vision. Like we said, there's no dialogue, but they convey a lot. You know, without a lick of dialogue, Kelly's camera is able to capture the entire kind of ecosystem of Donnie's life, both at home in the Killing Moon sequence and even more significantly at his school, where we meet every single character in a way where we know like exactly who they are through a single moment, a gesture, body language. Like we see the bullies before they ever say a word. We know that these guys are the bullies because they're acting like dicks and they're smoking pot, I think. Or no, they're taking coke, like in the, like out of their locker. They're like doing coke in the hallway. So
we weren't even joking about that.
No, yeah, exactly. But you get little moments like that with every single character, including the teachers and stuff. And you know exactly who they are before you actually get to know them, before you actually like officially meet them. You know who this character is. And it's really good. It's really economical filmmaking. It's a really elegant way to introduce them than if you were to do it like individually or through exposition. It's very fluid and it's very graceful filmmaking, I would say. I think that's a good way to describe it. It relays a lot of information while still keeping with the film's kind of weird, dreamlike rhythm. I just think it's incredibly well done. And there's a reason that this is like one of the key sequences that people remember when they think about Donnie Darko.
Yeah, economical is the word I'd use. And then it's cool that you know, we know what we know now, that how music videos had influenced him in that way, because he very clearly is telling a story and sees the music as part of that. And it's just kind of, I don't know, it's neat because it does work really, really well when you think about how much setup he doesn't have to do.
Yeah,
because he's getting it all done here in this few minutes.
Yeah, exactly. Very easily. And he does another music video in Southland Tales. He does the, have you seen Southland Tales recently?
I have not seen Southland Tales at all.
Oh, you've never seen it?
I've never seen it.
Oh man, you got to see it. You just have to experience it. I watched it last night for the first time in many, many years. And it is a ride, but there's a music video sequence in that where Justin Timberlake's character lip syncs to All These Things That I've Done by the Killers, and it's just him staring at the camera doing a music video, but instead of singing, he's lip syncing to that entire song, and it is the entire song. So it's like a 4-minute sequence of the movie.
Wow.
And it is weird, and I don't know why it's there.
I was about to say, I'm really curious how that fits into the plot.
Well, the thing about the plot to Southland Tales is that I have no fucking clue what's going on for the entire movie. So it kind of fits that theme. But anyway, we'll talk about Southland Tales later. Anyway,
must be nice to be Richard Kelly when so you don't really have to worry about a story necessarily.
just vibes. All right, so towards the end of the shoot on Donnie Darko, the production moved to a soundstage where they constructed the motel room where the family stays after their house gets smushed. The bathroom in the Darko house, that's on a set. They had to do that because they shoot it from 2 different angles, from Frank and from Donnie, and they had to be able to move the walls and things like that to make room for the camera. Donnie's therapist's office, Donnie's bedroom, all of those are on a soundstage. And of course, Donnie's bedroom, one of the reasons they put that on a soundstage was because it had to be completely destroyed by a jet engine. And that jet engine, by the way, was real. Alec Hammond, the production designer, he was able to find an actual jet engine for the production to use at a cost of about $10,000. He found it at a airplane graveyard somewhere and paid them $10,000 for it. They transported it to the set. They had to take a lot of the guts out of it, that were unnecessary to make it lighter.
I was about to say, because it weighs a whole lot.
It weighs a whole lot, yeah. And then they rigged it above the set with a crane and used an air pressure gun to send it crashing down through the set. So obviously, they only had one chance to get this right. Once it was done, the set was destroyed. The set was gone. So they had one shot. They shot it with 3 separate cameras to ensure that they got all the footage that they needed. And this scene originally ended with a shot of Donnie in his room with a big old piece of wood just going straight through his chest. Like, it's very clear that Donnie has been impaled and killed by this jet engine crashing. Did you see this scene? It's in the deleted scenes on the Blu-ray.
Yeah, I did see this.
Yeah. So it makes it very obvious that he's dead, but Kelly actually thought it was a little too gruesome and he cut it. And I think that the fact that the audience doesn't see Donnie's body at the end, which probably is something Kelly was thinking about as well, that kind of enhances the ambiguity of the film's ending a little bit.
Yeah, I might as well keep it mysterious.
Yeah, who knows? Who knows what happened to Donnie?
So a lot of care in these sets. And that very last shot, the very last shot of the whole shoot was they went to the therapist's office and they redressed that whole thing into Jim Cunningham's house so they could just set it on fire.
Yeah. So the shot where you see like the painting of Jim Cunningham and stuff like that burning when Donnie sets it on fire at the end.
It's always weird. I did theater, so like, some of the stuff I got to help out with like setting everything up, but you'd have like the carpenters to come in and like build sets or whatever, but it's just wild to me to, I know that they, at least with theater, you get like a run of like 2 weeks or however many weeks or whatever. And that it's, I don't know, maybe you hang on to it in case you ever need it again, but usually it just kind of has to get broken down or whatever. It's just weird to think about how much trouble movie set creators go through to build something. And they're like, cool, this looks beautiful, guys. Let's set it on fire.
Let's burn it down. But that's kind of a fun, like, ceremonial ending to the movie, like just setting your set on fire. That had to feel a little cathartic, maybe, right?
I guess that's probably true. Yeah.
Like,
another weird random thing connected to that was related to Spielberg again was because he does that like it was coincidental, like the bike ride or whatever, but he also, even in the commentary, talks about that when like they're pulling the jet engine out of the house, that his thought was Raiders of the Lost Ark, and so that's the Ark of the Covenant or whatever to go get. He says, like, to be examined and argued over and then forgotten about.
That's funny. Like, where did this come from?
Yeah, exactly.
So the film's shoot lasted, oddly enough, 28 days, just like the amount of time that he took to write it.
Yeah.
Just the same amount of time as the film takes place in. I don't know if that had to be a coincidence, right?
It says coincidental. So
I mean, yeah, I don't know how you could. I mean, when he was writing the movie, he didn't know that they were going to shoot for 28 days. And obviously, he didn't know how long it was going to take him to write the script. So that had to be coincidental. Why did he choose 28 days for the length of the movie? I don't know. Maybe it's like a lunar cycle thing.
He knew the movie 28 Days Later was going to come out, and it would be like another tangential universe.
I don't want to be in that one. And the shoot itself, I mean, it had its issues here and there. It's a low budget movie, obviously, so it was difficult in some ways. But the stress of the shoot really took its toll on Kelly, who he said he lost like 20 pounds during the course of 28 days. To lose 20 pounds, that's concerning. He said that was largely due to the pressure of, one, making such an ambitious film on such a small budget, but also the pressure he put on himself to justify to other people why he should be the one directing the film. Because remember, he's like 24, 25-year-old kid at this point. And he was, for a year, people were shutting doors in his face because he was saying, I need to be the one to direct this. Finally, someone gives him the chance. So he's like, I got to step it up. And I got to prove to these people that they made the right choice by entrusting me with $4.5 million to make this weird little movie.
I could see it. I mean, and you're thinking about too, not just the people financing the movie, but I mean, along with financing, you got Drew Barrymore over there, Patrick Swayze, and like all these that you're not making like, it's not like a big budget movie, but it's not like a low budget indie.
It's not like a $200,000 like indie movie. You're not making Evil Dead over here, right?
Right.
You've got
Exactly.
movie stars involved. You've got a guy who shot a movie for Ridley Scott. You've got you've got legendary people involved in your movie, so you do have to. That's a lot of pressure, you know.
Yeah, I just think that's crazy to think about, that like you're wanting to not let everyone down.
Right.
So I can see getting super stressed out. Speaking of Evil Dead, you mentioned Evil Dead, and in the movie theater scene, just speaking of filming, I think he said he had originally intended to have Chud playing in the theater.
Yeah, I did see that too. They wanted Chud, and the people who owned the rights to Chud were like being really difficult to work with, I think.
Yeah. And then he talked to our old friend Sam Raimi, who gave him the Evil Dead for free.
Yeah, I think like somebody involved in the movie, it might have been Nancy Javonin or it was somebody involved in the production, like knew Sam Raimi, like they were friends with Sam Raimi through Lionsgate, I think, they had a good working relationship with Lionsgate, which is who owned the rights to Evil Dead. So they were just like, you should probably just call Sam Raimi. He'll probably just like let you use Evil Dead. Or call Lionsgate, and they did, and they were able to get the rights to Evil Dead, get the rights to put the posters up and everything. Kelly actually said that the day they were shooting that, because they shot that at the Aero Theater, which is on like Santa Monica, I think, in Los Angeles, and the day they were filming it, they had Evil Dead and The Last Temptation of Christ, up on the marquee. Which I'll be honest, really weird Halloween double feature with those two movies.
That is a really weird
because it does
feature.
say like the other side does say like Halloween Frightmare double feature, and then it's Evil Dead and The Last Temptation of Christ, which I know The Last Temptation of Christ is a metaphorical thing, for Richard Kelly, because Donnie has this sort of Christ saving the world thing going on with him. But anyway, the day they were filming that, the outside scene where Donnie walks out, Sam Raimi happened to drive by in his car and saw Evil Dead. He saw Evil Dead on the marquee and saw that they were filming something. And he stopped. And he's like, hey guys, what's going on here? Like, he had no idea what was. I mean, obviously he had given permission to use it, but once you give permission, it's probably like, I guess I'll see this at some point. But he happened to drive by the day they were filming it and stopped to say hello.
That's awesome.
I know. I love it. So anyway, so the shoot's over. Poor Richard Kelly is stressed out, but he made the movie. It's in the can, right? But it is not smooth sailing. The stress of getting Donnie Darko out into the world was far from over. But before we get into the trouble that Donnie Darko had getting released, I do want to briefly touch on the film's music. We've talked about it a little bit because we talked about those music video sequences, but I think that Donnie Darko's iconic soundtrack is a large part of its enduring appeal, wouldn't you say?
I do. I think it's a huge part of it.
Yeah, it's one of the things you think about when you think about Donnie Darko is these like 80s new wave, like dark 80s new wave kind of tracks that they have. They're not playing like Cyndi Lauper and stuff. It's like kind of brooding 80s new wave stuff. But it also has a great score. I mean, the film score was composed by a guy named Michael Andrews. He was not really a film composer. He had some success as a member of a band called the Grey Boy All-Stars in the 90s. I think they're kind of like a jam band, if I remember right, the Grey Boy All-Stars. I might be wrong on that, so don't send me an angry email. But he got his first taste of scoring a movie when the band was asked to do the music for a film called The Zero Effect, which was directed by Jake Kasdan. And then later they did the music for Freaks and Geeks, the TV show Freaks and Geeks, which coincidentally features Seth Rogen. So in addition to the film's score, though, a handful of classic new wave songs were used in the films. And this was kind of before 80s nostalgia was as popular as it has become in a post Stranger Things world that we're living in now. 80s nostalgia was not quite the same thing. So the rights were a lot easier to get and a lot more affordable, incidentally, than they might be a few years later. Because think about this. I was thinking about this. I mentioned the time frame earlier, but when Donnie Darko was being filmed, 1988, the year that the movie is set in, 1988, that was only 12 years in the past, which is not that long, really, when you think about it. So that would be the equivalent of a movie being filmed right now that's set in 2012. So this would be like people weren't as nostalgic for the for the songs that were being used in this as they would later on, because there wasn't that big of a gap in time between the filming and when the songs were actually released. So this would be akin to like somebody being nostalgic today about Gautier, somebody that I used to know, like a big 2012.
It is so fucking weird that is the song I was about to say.
That was the biggest song of 2012.
That is, I don't know. It's just, I feel like we're psychically linked now. That's odd because I was literally about to say that same song. It was like this is when you use it now, and you're nostalgic for that song,
right? Yeah. So it's but you don't think about that being like an old song. So it's kind of a weird little thing because we're watching Donnie Darko now, and 1988 was going on 30 years ago, going on 3 decades ago at this point. But at the time, it was in the relatively recent past, so it wasn't quite the same. So it's funny to think about the movie in that way. So at the end of the movie, there's another music montage where we see all the characters in their bedroom, they're waking up after whatever the fuck happens at the end of the movie. They're all waking up in their bedrooms. And Kelly had originally envisioned a song called MLK by U2, but the production couldn't afford to license another song, and honestly, that song, it's like the mood of that song would fit, but the lyrics, it's about MLK. So the lyrics definitely don't fit the scene. So I'm glad they didn't go with that, honestly. But because they couldn't afford to license it, Michael Andrews, the composer, he collaborated with his childhood friend, a guy named Gary Jules, on a stripped-down cover of Tears for Fears' song Mad World, which is a song that they had covered in a band that they were in together in high school.
So was Gary Jules not huge before this?
No, he was a nobody before this.
That's so weird because I just remember him blowing up because of this,
Yeah.
or like just feel like I would see his name more often. So that's interesting. I did not even realize that.
Yeah, this was kind of it. Like he Andrews and him had done it as they had done it acoustic in high school, but for this, basically, Andrews liked the idea of like recording a song for a movie because he had, that's something that movies used to do. Somebody would record a song for the movie, and he brought this idea. I think he brought it to Nancy Javonin and said, "Okay, listen to this." And he played the song like on a piano and sang it himself and recorded a demo and sent it to her. And she thought it was a great idea. So then he got Gary Jules, who he thought was a better singer than him, to come in and actually do the vocals on it.
Interesting. It's a cool cover, by the way.
It's a great cover. I mean, it's another one of those iconic things from this movie that when you think about Donnie Darko, you think about that cover of Mad World. I think that cover is probably more popular than the actual Tears for Fears song version these days. What do you say? Is that sacrilege to say that?
I don't know if it's sacrilege.
Let's say for people our age who didn't grow up.
At least for people our age.
Yeah.
Definitely after this movie, you saw it used in a lot of different places. I always remember it for like the Gears of War game. Like the commercials for that would have it played.
Yeah. Yeah. That was not that long ago. That's pretty recent.
Yeah. But anyway, so people definitely use it at least. I think it actually, because it feels like this happened a lot. That people made like more somber versions of these older songs too.
Yeah, it's something that pops up a lot in movie trailers nowadays, and I hate this trend. But now that you said that, I think that maybe this song is the cause of that. Did this song start that trend that I now hate? I hate that trend because it just feels like everybody's doing it now.
Yeah. Now that we're talking about it, I feel like that's. I don't know if I remember something before this, but wow.
God damn you, Gary Jules. Thanks.
Everybody's like, wow, this is wicked. Let's do this.
Let's just keep going. Though Donnie Darko held its world premiere on January 19th, 2001 at the Sundance Film Festival. And according to Sean McKittrick, the producer, a lot of the old school attendees at the festival, they kind of shunned the film. They thought that it couldn't possibly be a low budget indie movie looking the way that it did, especially one that has, we haven't talked about it really, but it has CGI in it. This movie has computer generated effects, which I think were done by like one of Kelly and McKittrick's friends for like $5,000. So like still very low budget effects, but they look good, for the time.
Yeah. He uses them in a good way, which is interesting.
And obviously those water tendrils we know what those are inspired by, right? The Abyss.
That's true. Yeah, I don't know that I had thought about that beforehand for some weird reason.
Yeah, I mean, he is admittedly a James Cameron fan and grew up a James Cameron fan, so that they were very much Very much inspired by The Abyss.
Well, to hear him talk about it, at least, I mean, I'm sure that's why it is water, although I don't know. He says in the commentary stuff about water and metal being important elements or something. Well, he says a lot of things in the commentary. Anyway, the point is, he does also say there that they were at least partially inspired by John Madden. That like high and watching football, and him
John Madden draws
plays out on the screen. Yeah.
Well, I think that was the idea.
Where each character is going to go.
Yeah, I think that was the idea conceptually of the idea of somebody following along a predetermined path, right? It's like there's a John Madden's God, and he's drawing the arrow, and you're following it,
right?
But then the actual visual of what that looks like on screen is the water tendril, which was inspired by The Abyss. I mean, this whole movie is just a bunch of different inspirations of Richard Kelly's from all over the place that, like I said earlier, get thrown into a blender and come out with something very unique.
Well, also, like you said earlier, like a pre-Stranger Things.
Right. Yeah. So the movie's at Sundance. It had some decent buzz going into the festival. Although once it screened, the reactions were kind of mixed. It seemed like a lot of people just didn't quite know what to make of it. I remember James Duval tells a story about at a Q&A afterwards. One guy got up and says, why are you guys here at Sundance? This is the worst movie at Sundance. This is terrible. This is everything that Sundance this is the opposite of what Sundance is about. And then at the same, another guy gets up at the Q&A and he says, well, I think this is the best movie at Sundance and I love it. I'm glad you're here. And, so obviously it was a contentious movie at the festival, to say the least.
It was before Twitter/X, where you had to do all of that in person.
Right.
So it sounds like the reviews of every movie now on Twitter, basically. Or X.
So unfortunately, once the production, once they left Park City, once they left the Sundance Film Festival, they had no buyers. They had no distribution deal in place, which is not a great way. It's not how you want to leave Sundance. You're going to Sundance to show the movie, to get buzz, and to get a buyer, to get somebody to buy it, to put it in movie theaters.
Unless you're Kevin Smith and you go and just buy your own movie.
Yeah, well,
you did that.
Yeah, I do. Which movie was that? Do you remember? Was it like Yoga Hosers or something?
It might have been. I want to say it was like Red State.
Red State.
But
yeah, one of those later era Kevin Smith movies. Which Kevin Smith, by the way, is in Southland Tales under a lot of prosthetics. It's really weird. I think him and Kelly are buddies.
He's also on the director's cut commentary, which I did not get this movie, which I did not get a chance to listen to. But you apparently should check out, because he apparently asked all the right questions. Yeah.
Nice. Maybe I'll understand the movie after listening to that.
I doubt
it. So they leave Sundance, and a few months go by, 4 or 5 months. The movie still doesn't have a distributor. Things are getting pretty dire. The songs for the film had not been paid for. They're waiting on money from a distributor to pay for those. So they're worried that they might have to cut all the music from the film if they don't get a distribution deal soon. And then everyone that they did talk to about potentially distributing it, they all wanted to cut like half an hour from the movie, which is it's not a terribly long movie anyway. But finally, they got in contact with a guy named Aaron Ryder. He's a producer who worked for a distribution company called Newmarket. And Newmarket and Aaron Ryder had been at the same Sundance Festival where Donnie Darko had its premiere, but they were there not as buyers, but to promote a film that they had produced. And that film was Christopher Nolan's Memento, which is, of course, the movie that kind of put Christopher Nolan on the map.
It's so weird. I did not know that. And, it's interesting, like, when I was thinking about your point earlier about the most important cult film in the past, maybe in your lifetime, at least past 25 years or something like that, I was trying to think of other cult films that had come out in the last 25 years to be like, are there others? And for some reason, like Memento did come up, where I was just like, Memento was not like some blockbuster at the time, even though that's what Nolan does now. But
yeah, but it still did well. So I wouldn't call it a cult film in the same way that Donnie Darko is, like it did well and it made money and it was kind of like mainstream from the get-go,
Yeah. Okay. So that one always sticks out to me as like almost that way, just because I heard about it probably from you. And, just remember hearing about it a lot before I ever saw it.
Actually
and
saw
then and then just it being a super unique thing, something I had not ever seen before.
I mean, I saw it in the theater, so it was a big enough release to play in Greenville, South Carolina.
Yeah.
So
so probably not the same.
Yeah. But so Aaron Ryder, he's interested in Donnie Darko. So he sets up a screening with his bosses at Newmarket. And then in a very strategic move, he invited Christopher Nolan and Christopher Nolan's wife, Emma, to watch it with them. So they watched the movie. And then after the screening, Nolan and his wife, they both went up to the guys at Newmarket, the executives there. And he said flat out, he's like, you guys should distribute this. You need to buy this movie. You need to get it out there. He loved it. So Nolan, he also gave Kelly some suggestions and some little tweaks to make on the film, like on those the title cards that say like October 2nd, 28 days to go. That parentheses where it says 28 days to go, that was Christopher Nolan's idea, because it creates kind of a countdown, which creates urgency in the film, because you're working towards something, and over the course of the film, you find out that something is the end of the world. But yeah, that parentheses, that was one of Nolan's little notes that they gave on it.
That's a pretty big helpful thing about this movie too, just to count that down. So that's kind of cool to watch a movie and be able to think of something like that. I don't know. Maybe that's a random thing to say, but
that's why Christopher Nolan is one of the smartest filmmakers working right now, probably. Definitely one of the biggest.
Last night I watched the movie.
Like that.
Yeah, last night I watched Bones and All.
How was that?
I loved it.
I haven't seen it, but I love Luca. I saw Challengers recently in the theater, and that guy's a hell of a filmmaker. I haven't seen.
I saw somebody on Letterboxd say horror meets poetry or something like that, and I was like, that's a pretty cool description of this. Yeah, I like that one. Anyway, my point there is like it takes place over a long period of time, and there are the little flashes on the screen of like October, and like January,
and like time frame.
and it's just kind of I don't know, like as a narrative device, this is kind of a cool thing if you're trying to, if the time span also is important to the movie or something.
Exactly, which it is obviously in this one. Yeah. So after that screening, Newmarket signed on to distribute the film, and then Kelly spent the whole summer shaping the film up to turn it into the best possible version of itself, which included a day of reshoots, or rather, I guess additional photography is more accurate, because they weren't reshooting, they were just adding stuff. And during that, it was just one day, but they added Frank to the Mad World sequence at the end, where we see his sketches of the mask, and we see him like James Duvall touch his eye. And that was actually adding Frank to that sequence was another Christopher Nolan idea, where he suggested that they add him so that we see where he is during that too.
Well, he recognized that Frank was the star of the show, I guess.
I guess so, yeah. So
Frank goes down as of an all-time character, just because, not unlike, I don't know, Michael Myers even, he's like the Halloween costume where you're like, what were they going as? Like,
right.
Where did that costume come from?
It's just like, a fucked up bunny.
Weird fucking costume.
Yeah. He created it from scratch, apparently, too, because he's got the sketches and everything there in his room. So maybe it's just a character he created. So Newmarket's plan was to release Donnie Darko straight to video. They wanted to take advantage of the growing DVD market and everything. But Kelly felt that he's like, this needs to go to theaters. He didn't want to forever be known as the straight to video guy. Like, my first movie came out straight to video. He didn't want that to be part of his legacy. And he actually had to bring in Drew Barrymore to kind of turn on the charm and her, cute little Drew Barrymore smile, and just kind of beg Newmarket, like, yeah, you guys, you want to release this in theaters, right? Just kind of like talk them into giving it a theatrical release.
I, for some reason, feel like Todd can nail a Drew Barrymore, and I'm a little disappointed he's not here for that, because I feel like he has a Drew Barrymore, and I don't know why.
Yeah, he's got that one in his back pocket just in case.
Because I just want to say, like, I feel like she could charm most anybody. She's just got that sweet little voice of hers that,
Well, it worked. It worked on the Newmarket people. They relented. They set a release date for Halloween 2001. It's going to be a limited release, New York, LA, and then a couple of other cities like Seattle and Chicago, bigger cities. Seemed like a pretty perfect time to release the movie. The entire movie is a lead up to Halloween. It's a literal countdown to Halloween. Its conclusion takes place at a Halloween party. But then a month and a half before the release, in September of 2001, there was an incident. Is incident a big enough word? Maybe a plane, an airplane related incident.
I got grolls at the live show because I called it the second most important situation with a plane crashing into a building. Justin defended me. Everybody groaned, and Justin was like, "He didn't do it."
I didn't want you to sully your good name, Gary.
Thank you, but yeah, that's so 9/11, an important date.
Yes,
release.
September 11th,
and in the country's history,
and the history of the world, honestly. But 9/11 obviously had a big impact on the film industry. Hollywood was pretty hesitant to produce or release any films that featured a lot of violence. They especially avoided movies with any sort of terrorist activity or plane crashes. And unfortunately for the folks who made Donnie Darko, the trailer for the movie was already out, and it prominently featured the idea of a plane engine falling through a house. So not great timing, but it was too late to pull the plug on the film at this point. So it went ahead with its scheduled release on October 26, 2001, and it did nothing. It did very little business. It was dead on arrival. It brought in about $110,000 during its opening weekend, and then quickly disappeared from theaters.
I even read that Kelly was worried, like that he thought the there were like was a little bit of talk about the opening credits because the font was kind of Arabic.
Oh, so wow, really?
We're gonna have to change that. Yeah.
Wow, that's crazy.
It's pretty nuts.
Well, it also didn't help that this movie's opening in New York and LA, and in New York, post 9/11, like people aren't going to movies. That they've got other things on their mind. So people aren't like going out to have a good time right after 9/11, right? So one of the major markets where the movie was supposed to open and start gaining buzz so that it could open wider, nobody's going to see it. And not to mention everywhere else it opened in the rest of the country, people just aren't in the mood. The cultural mood was really weird post 9/11. I mean, you're old enough to remember. I'm old enough to remember what it was like. It was weird. And people didn't want to see dark stuff like this on screen.
Yeah.
So they didn't. In the case of Donnie Darko, they didn't go to it. And it like I said, it quickly disappeared from theaters in the US, but then something very interesting happened. A full year after its uneventful US release, in October of 2002, Donnie Darko was released in the UK, and it was a huge success. What had been expected to be a small run in a few art house theaters soon expanded to several months, largely due to word of mouth. The film's distributor, a company called Metrodome, they latched onto the growing popularity of the film by screening it for some of London's most prominent graffiti artists who all loved it. And before you know it, murals and artwork that were inspired by the film started popping up. There was apparently a big mural of the Smurf orgy, according to Richard Kelly. I couldn't find any pictures of it. Pro tip, do not Google Smurf orgy. And Metrodome,
because you couldn't find a Smurf orgy, just this specific one.
Yeah, this one is hard to find. But this whole graffiti thing created a sort of grassroots marketing campaign for the film, and then Metrodome even collaborated with a local art gallery called Jaguar Shoes to help with the promotion of the film. Jaguar Shoes still has this on their website. You can view the artwork, but they basically they did a gallery show where they invited 12 graffiti artists to create Donnie Darko inspired pieces, which would be on display for 28 days, 6 hours, 42 minutes, and 12 seconds. And they even had a digital, I think, countdown timer in the gallery.
That's wild. Jake Gyllenhaal was in the UK at the time. He had just done like a play in London, he said, and they asked him to do some press for Donnie Darko, and he seemed like kind of shocked by the reception of the movie in England. Like the Brits, he said, were just. His exact quote is, "Brits seem to appreciate that if you have something special, it doesn't have to be perfect." They acted like they had just found this kindred spirit, and he just talks about a little bit how just different it felt being over there at the time when all this
Yeah.
was happening, and
But-
you know, when nothing had happened in the U.S.
Yeah, it's really interesting because I feel like so much of the movie is steeped in a very specific American nostalgia. Like that suburban setting is a very like specifically American kind of thing. You know, like there's
You would
so
think,
much of this
yeah.
movie that feels distinctly American that it's so interesting to me that the British are who first latched onto it and embraced it. I mean, maybe some of it's, you know, obviously everyone knows what it's like to be a teenager, no matter what country you're in, and teenagers emotionally go through the same shit, no matter where you are. So maybe that's something that they latched onto, or maybe it was just the right people, the right environment, the weird sci-fi stuff, and it just attracted the right people, and word of mouth spread. I don't know. It's a really weird phenomenon that nobody involved in the film seems to be able to fully like explain like why this happened. Nobody really knows why it happened. It was just one of those lucky things that happened to the movie.
Well, aren't we all better because it did happen?
We are, because we might not have me and you may have never seen this movie had it not been a big hit in the UK. Most of the people in America, unless you were at Sundance or happened to be one of the few people who saw it in that brief theatrical run, you may not have seen it had it not been a success in the UK. Because what started happening is the buzz in the UK trickled back to the US. All of a sudden, you know, this is in the early days of the internet, message boards, Ain't It Cool News, Chud, and all this stuff. So people started talking about it. Word of mouth starts building here where it had not had any earlier. And according to Kelly, at least, the film was seen as such a failure in the US that had it not been for the success in England, it may not have even ever gotten a DVD release here. But thanks to that overseas success, it was released here. And then all of a sudden, these American teens and college kids who'd been reading about the film on the internet were able to see it. And it kind of turned into an underground hit. It's a really, unlike most, even other cult movies we talk about, it's a really weird trajectory where it was not embraced here, but it was embraced overseas. And then in the country where it was produced, that word of mouth got back that you should see this movie that you could have seen had you gone to a theater to see it. It was out a year ago. It's just so strange to me. But I think, you know, much like The Matrix had done a couple years earlier, The Matrix came out in 99, so a couple years before this. Donnie Darko, it challenged its audience, but in a way that didn't feel intimidating. It presented philosophical musings in a way that appealed to younger audiences, and its plot was complex enough to inspire debate and conversation, but still accessible enough not to scare people away. I think there's a really interesting thing going on in this film where it's ambitious, but it's not like threatening, if that makes sense. So over the coming months, the movie became a grassroots sensation and a bona fide cult phenomenon in the US. You had websites popping up that talked about the film's philosophy or theories on it. It became a topic of discussion on both message boards and in smoke-filled dorm rooms the world over. People just trying to talk about this movie and say, what does it mean? How do you explain the ending and all this stuff? So I want to bring that level of discussion here, Gary, and ask you, what are your theories? What does it all mean? What are your thoughts? I mean, I have already gathered that you enjoy the film. So I know that you enjoy the film, but I know there's a lot more to talk about with this movie other than is it good or bad? Because I think it's good. I think we both think it's good. Am I wrong in saying that?
I have a confession to make. Up until our live event, I did not care about this movie.
Really?
I never cared that much about this movie. I'd seen it a couple of times, and I've seen both versions of it, but I've never thought it was particularly like amazing. Like I've never been fascinated with it or anything. Generally, because I mean, it could be partly because of time travel or something, and just like watching it, just like okay, it doesn't make sense, and that because for that aspect of it, we can dig deeper into it. Do I think it makes sense? No, I don't think it makes sense, and I don't think that Richard Kelly knows what the fuck he's talking about either. And I mean, I think maybe in his head somewhere he has it all planned out, but I think it's not without what's the word I'm looking for?
Paradox?
Paradox, yeah. It's not without paradox. The point is, I never got that into this movie, but seeing it with an audience changed a lot of my opinion on that. Not like I hated the movie. I just didn't care about it that much.
Can I ask, how old were you when you first saw it?
I mean, I did not see this movie for a few years after. I mean, time had passed from when it. I was gonna say earlier when you were talking about it hitting DVD. Like, I don't remember this movie before seeing a DVD. You know, like it. I don't remember it being in theaters. I didn't see it then.
Well, it definitely wasn't in theaters anywhere where we were living.
Okay, so I mean, I bet it was. I bet it was after. Honestly, like probably after 2005 or something before I even saw this movie. You know, it had been a few years.
So you were probably late 20s or something?
Yeah.
Mid to late 20s?
Yeah, I would say so. So I don't know. It just didn't hit with me the same way that it seemed to have hit a lot of other film nerds. And so I never thought that much of it. And then watching it with an audience helped out so much. Like, just the parts where people laughed, where I had not laughed before, and that I didn't think were that funny even, or something. And then the audience laughs. It helped make me kind of laugh at it. And there were just stuff that the crowd was kind of getting excited about or thinking was cool. And then it helped it click for me. And I just, for some reason on my own, it had never happened. And so anyway, but yeah, now I would say I like the movie, but I still have a problem with a lot of the story. Like, I don't, and I don't think it's because I can't wrap my brain around it. It's that I think I'm perfectly capable of wrapping my brain around it, and I'm trying, and it does not work.
Yeah, I mean, I don't disagree with you on that. I've seen this movie so many times. So many times, because I discovered it pretty early on in its life, and I've never been able to properly explain it. I've always understood that Donnie goes back in time at the end, but I don't understand exactly how he does. I don't think that's properly explained in the movie. The movie doesn't feel the need to explain this, although Kelly's director's cut, which we'll talk about in a minute, does try to explain it a bit, and in the process, I think makes it even more confusing. Now, there are plenty of people on the internet who've worked out the whole timeline of events. I sent one to you, that Radio Times article, which is one of the more detailed explanations that I found. And it's like they figured it out. And I was going to read it here, or at least read some of it here. But as I started reading it, like my eyes started going cross, and I got bored with it because. I mean, maybe I'll post it to our social media or something, or throw it in a newsletter or something like that to let people read it for themselves. But, I get that their explanation makes sense, but the movie doesn't convey it.
No, there's 100% things that he just doesn't bother to explain or spell out. But as best I can tell, and I'll try to do this as succinctly as possible, there are like 3 answers people come up with. Some people think it's all just a dream, and which is fine. That's not
that's a cop out.
That's a cop out ending. Yeah, that's what I'm looking for. My favorite explanation of it, which I think can work, is that some people really latch on to he's descending into madness and schizophrenia, and like he's just gone mental, and I could buy that, except Kelly keeps saying in the commentary, and even on the director's cut, there's like scenes where they talk about like the doctor's not giving him anything. He's actually on placebos.
Yeah, and the director's cut, it's made clear, or she says that the medicine he's been taking is placebo. So when he's been getting better, he's been doing it on his own, not with her treatment, basically.
Yeah, and Kelly 100% doesn't lean into any of those. Like he likes the sci-fi weirdo time travel narrative, definitely. And as best I can tell, so that it's like there is at some point in time, for some reason, in this one lady death or whatever, grandma death or whatever her name was,
Roberta Sparrow,
she figures it out, and she figures out that at some point, like, time just decides for no fucking reason that it's going to break off into this tangent timeline.
Right.
And so you've basically got like a parallel timeline going along, and it lasts for like a certain period of time. And at the end of it, if something is not done to like offset the change or the weirdness that happened, then basically it's going to collapse in on itself and all of time would be destroyed or some weird fucking thing like that.
Right. So in the case of the movie, that thing that's the anomaly that has entered our universe from this tangent universe is the plane engine.
Right. And then so you get basically at that point, when it happens for whatever reason, then you get like somebody selected as like the receiver, the living receiver, I think is what they say. And so like in this case, that is Donnie Darko. And when that happens, the living receiver all of a sudden has fucking superpowers, and they're stronger, and they have
which is how he put the axe into the bronze statue, because you could only do that if you could float and had super strength.
Exactly. And he's telepathic, or has telekinesis or whatever. So none of that, by the way, is ever explained, really.
No, more of that is explained in the director's cut, which again we'll mention more about that here in a second. But like the stuff about the living receiver and the primary universe and the tangent universe and all these terms that you're using to explain that, most of that comes from the director's cut and not in the original theatrical. You've got the manipulated universe, the manipulated dead, the living receiver, all this nerdy ass jargon that isn't actually in the theatrical cut for the most part.
Yeah, it's in that philosophy of time travel thing. And so there's the artifact that comes over to that creates the tangent universe. Then you've got the living receiver. There's the manipulated, which is the other people. There's, if you die, then they get special powers if they're in that tangent universe,
which is Frank, right?
Which is like what happens to Frank. So you can like move around or something, I guess, and appear at different points. I don't know that anybody. And so basically, to finish this point off, so Donnie has to accept all of this stuff, and he has to send the artifact back through the port, because the way the universe collapses on itself is a wormhole opens and it just everything collapses or something. But if he can send the artifact back through the wormhole that had come in the first place, it'll shoot it back to the start and just refresh the timeline.
Something like that,
basically. Something like that. So he does that at the end, like after Gretchen dies, that he goes and sits up on the hill. And how does he do it? That's where you find out he's got telekinesis or whatever, because he rips the jet engines, like the jet's engine off, and sends it through the wormhole to go back. He just does that with his brain, which Richard Kelly does say in the commentary, because he thinks you should just fucking know that, I guess. I don't know. And he just says it real matter-of-factly.
As if that's very obvious in the film.
Right. And so and in that way he saves the universe. My bigger thing is that, and then it's like, I guess the universes merge back together and everything's fine because people seem to wake up and remember like sort of things that have happened.
Or maybe it felt like a dream to them or something. I don't know what they're reflecting on.
It's not really clear on that, and it's not really clear on like Donnie, like, is he like happy at the end, and he's just like, well, if I die, all these people are better off? Is that what the thing is?
I mean, I think that's where some of the Jesus metaphors that and theories come about on the internet. It's Messiah theory, that he's like some sort of Messiah because he's sacrificing himself so that the rest of mankind lives. So, and obviously him walking out to the last temptation of Christ is a little on the nose as far as that, but he does have
I mean, I guess it is the rest of mankind. It's just the universe, the whole whatever, all of time and creation is going to collapse in on itself if he doesn't do this. But I don't know. It's like that part of it's just weird to me, because then that begs the question, then if it is this Jesus thing, it's like, so why does this happen exactly?
Yeah,
Is it,
that's the
and
thing
there
is
are
that,
these set rules? Is it God? And that's, so God's doing it.
yeah.
And it's like, why is God doing it? Because it also, like, it doesn't ever seem like with some of the stuff that plays out that it's ever like a free will thing. Like, it's just like something clicks into place and all the parts are moving in the right way, and then it's just gonna work its way out.
Well, because
So
you've got the predetermined, John Madden arrow coming out of your chest, right?
Right.
So, which negates the whole idea of free will if it's already predetermined.
Yeah, so then it's just like, so it's a weird random thing that happens, and in that case, like, what's God doing? Why is he making broken stuff? Like,
Now
then
you
it's
know
just-
who we sound like? We sound like those kids who were smoking pot in their dorm rooms in 2003 after they just watched this movie.
Right.
This is what this movie does to you, is it makes you go over these things, but then because of the way it's structured, you contradict yourself, and then you come up with another explanation, and you just keep going and going. But I think that's part of why the movie is so enduring, honestly. Like, yes, I mean, you've got all this explanation now, but when people were seeing this in like 2003, they didn't have the director's cut. They didn't have the
100%.
commentary. They were just
Yeah.
trying to watch this movie and like, so what the hell's going on? And I personally like not knowing all of that, because I think it makes for a better viewing experience.
For what it's worth, too, Richard Kelly doesn't. He says he does not like calling, like, it wasn't his choice, or either it was suggested and he just went with it. But the newer version, he doesn't like calling it the director's cut, because he thinks that the first cut is fine. That's the movie. But
Right.
he looks at the other one as a special edition, like with some added stuff for people.
Which,
if they want it.
Which I get that honestly makes more sense as a way to reference it, because because he wasn't forced to cut things. I mean, I think that was a marketing thing probably on the DVD companies or on New Market's side. But all of this like over explaining, to me, Donnie Darko is one of those movies that you feel more than anything. Like, I don't think it needs to be tied up in a little bow. Like, even with the over explaining that he does in that director's cut, the movie and the ending, they make the ending and the movie make enough sense to work. Like, you get the gist of what happened, even if all the gaps aren't filled in for you. Like, I don't know how better to explain that other than like, it still works despite the fact that there's a lot unexplained.
You have to let yourself go. Yeah. I always hate this with time stuff, but you just kind of have to. It's a vibe.
It is a vibe. I mean, that's where I was about to go with Donnie Darko. To me, is what I like to think of as a vibe movie. Like, I didn't make up that term. I first heard it from this. There's a YouTuber that I like, Patrick H. Willems. He's an online movie essayist who's a lot wittier and more successful and popular than I am. So a lot of people probably already know who he is, but he coined the term in this YouTube video a few months ago, and it was about a Christopher Nolan film. It was about Tenet, another movie that's very hard to explain, but no less enjoyable because it's hard to explain. A vibe movie is a movie where you just kind of let the movie wash over you. You get lost in it. You get lost in how it feels to watch the movie and experience the movie, to the point where you don't really care if you can explain everything that's happening. Like, enough about what's happening. In Tenet, you watch Tenet, I know enough about what's going on in that movie. Could I explain every plot point to you? Absolutely not. No. But I know the gist of where the movie's of the trajectory of the movie, just like in Donnie Darko. Like, I understand enough about this plot and there's enough explained for me to follow it to an extent to where I care about the conclusion. But do I understand every little facet of it? No, because the movie doesn't bother to explain it. And I think that's kind of okay.
You know what makes it a vibe movie more than even just that makes me able to accept it more as a vibe movie, I should say, is that there's more to it than that plot point.
Yeah, there's a lot of character stuff.
Yeah, a lot of character stuff. So you just kind of get invested in all the characters and what's going on. And so I can even see it like, a younger me even being more invested in just like the angst or the whatever about it, the teenage life of it.
Yeah.
It's just there's something else. So that it's like this is the tangential timeline is almost that way as a plot point too. Like it's just like it is, it's another thing that's happening over here.
Yeah. After Donnie Darko kind of belatedly became a hit, Kelly continued to explore all this mythology, all this stuff that you're talking about in a book. First, there was the book, the Donnie Darko book, very clever title, the Donnie Darko book, but it featured pages from the philosophy of time travel, stuff that doesn't appear in the movie. And it also features the screenplay and a very lengthy interview that I used as one of my sources on this episode. So that was his first like stab at like explaining more of this stuff by putting that philosophy of time travel stuff in the Donnie Darko book. And then that director's cut that we've referenced was released in 2004. And the way that came about was that, wanting to take advantage of the film's newfound success, the president of Newmarket, a guy named Bob Burney, he decided he's like, hey, let's re-release the film. People know what it is now. People will go see it. And Kelly suggested that they take it a step further and release a director's cut, or I don't know if he referred to it as a director's cut, but with additional footage in it. And this director's cut, did you watch both of them this time?
Yeah.
You watched both. So the director's cut runs about 20 minutes longer than the theatrical and features quite a few alterations and additions, including inserts of that book, The Philosophy of Time Travel, restored scenes that had been deleted, from the theatrical version for, pacing reasons and things like that, and alternate music cues, some of which were songs that they hadn't been able to afford the first time around. Like you've got the opening track, which is changed from it's Echo the Bunnymen's The Killing Moon in the theatrical, and that's changed to Never Tear Us Apart by NXS. I have to ask you, Gary, because me and my wife disagree on this, but which version do you like better? Not on the movie as a whole, on that needle drop. Killing Moon or Never Tear Us Apart?
I feel like I'm more connected with the Killing Moon working in the opening. I think that Never Tear Us Apart by NXS is the better song, though.
I'm with you. That's exactly what I told Bunny. I said, I think, and I love the Killing Moon as a song, mostly because of this movie, honestly, but I love that song. But I do think it works really well in that scene. And I think it works better than the NXS song. But if I'm just like throwing one on a playlist, it's probably going to be NXS. Yeah. Overall, I prefer the original theatrical cut. I think it's paced better. Some of the scenes that Kelly put back into the director's cut are good. There's one in particular with Donnie and his dad in the backyard, like chatting, that I think is just a really good little character scene. I do like the addition of the scene that explains that Donnie's been taking placebo. But other than that, like I really don't like the extra philosophy of time travel stuff in there. I think it makes it more confusing, and I think it over explains things. And it's like, what I was just saying, like this movie is better unexplained in a way.
Yeah, I'm not even. I think that the theatrical cut's definitely better, and like you said, for the pacing, I think the other one's a little too long. And I don't even like the placebo scene, honestly, because that just makes me go like, what is this therapist doing? Like, what's her problem? Like, why is she still like acting like she's treating him for schizophrenia, and she's just like giving him drugs? Because it doesn't seem like the parents know that they're not real.
Yeah,
it's like. I don't know. It's just weird to me because I'm just like watching it. I'm like, what exactly is this? This seems unethical.
Well, thanks to the cult success of Donnie Darko, Kelly was able to secure financing for his next film, one that was even more ambitious than Donnie Darko. That film, which we've mentioned a couple of times, is called Southland Tales, and it features the cast of this movie is nuts. Like, it's insane. It really is. The movie itself is also very insane. He also had a lot of the behind-the-scenes guys from Donnie Darko, like Stephen Poster, April Ferry, Alec Hammond. All of them come back to help him with Southland Tales. It's a very ambitious film. But when it was released in November of 2007, the film polarized critics and audiences. It was famously booed at the Cannes Film Festival when it premiered. It walked away from the film festival with its tail tucked between its legs. And when it was released, it brought in $374,000 total on a budget of $17 million. Now, over the years, Southland Tales has amassed a small cult following, although it's never become a pop culture mainstay in the way that Donnie Darko has. If you think Donnie Darko is confusing and weird, crank that confusing and weird dial up to like 11 and you'll be somewhere near where Southland Tales is. It is one of the strangest, most confusing. I like it, admittedly. I think it's a fun movie. I think it's really funny. It's very much more specifically, it's a comedy more openly than Donnie Darko is. Donnie Darko's got jokes, but I would say Southland Tales is a dark comedy. But man, the sci-fi plot elements and things like that are way more complex and more confusing than what Donnie Darko does. It's insane that it exists. It's insane that somebody read the script and gave him $17 million to make it.
I wonder if it's got like a cult following just because people want to.
Yeah,
give it that.
It's the sheer weirdness of it. I mean, that's what you experience. It's worth checking out if you're into Donnie Darko enough to want to see something even stranger. It's a wild ride. But like I said, it was a major disappointment. I mean, not just a disappointment. Like, that's a disaster. $374,000 on a $17 million budget. That's a disaster.
He followed us back one of those million,
right? Not even a half. Not even a half. He followed that up with a movie called The Box in 2009, which was an adaptation of Richard Matheson's story Button Button, although it goes into some very different places than Button Button does. That one starred James Marsden, Cameron Diaz, and Frank Langella. It also received mixed reviews from critics, and although it certainly did better financially than Southland Tales, it was also pretty disappointing. I think it made $33 million on a $30 million budget, so it like barely eked out a little bit of profit. But it's also a strange movie. I watched it this week as well, and it's not as entertaining as Southland Tales, but it's a lot easier to follow. But it's weird. It's a fucking movie. It feels very personal for Richard Kelly too, because like the dad's a NASA scientist, the mom's a teacher, just like his parents. There's a lot of autobiographical stuff that he weaves into the story that's based on a Richard Matheson story, but it's also sort of it's strange, but entertaining, but not as wild and wacky as Southland Tales. But then after that, like nothing. I mean, he wrote the script for Domino, the Tony Scott movie with Keira Knightley, which is pretty good in 2005. He wrote that during this time. But then after after The Box, like he just kind of like, he hasn't done anything, honestly. Like he's been attached to a few projects in the years since, but nothing's ever come of them. 2013 was the last thing I heard about him that was like almost made. He was working on the movie, but James Gandolfini was his lead, and then James Gandolfini died while they were doing pre-production. And then the whole movie just kind of fell apart, and he like hasn't done anything. I mean, in more recent interviews, he's mentioned being open to doing a proper Donnie Darko sequel and that he's got ideas for a big ambitious sequel. He's even kind of said that he's talked a little bit to Jake Gyllenhaal about the idea, but nothing's ever come to fruition on that. And maybe that's because the Donnie Darko franchise, as it was, already had its name sullied a bit by an official sequel, which is called S. Darko. That stands for Samantha. It's a movie that follows Donnie's youngest sister after Donnie's death. She is once again played by DeVay Chase. When that was released in 2009, it received almost unanimously negative reviews. Have you seen it?
I have not. I was going to ask you about this.
I watched it this week. Never seen it before. It is something. I don't think it's as bad as its reputation, but maybe that's because my expectations were very low, very, very low. It definitely feels like a movie that wants badly to be Donnie Darko. Like it almost recreates scenes. Like there's a scene in a movie theater. There's a lot of imagery that they're kind of recreating for a completely different story. It doesn't have really anything to do with the plot of the original one, not in a major way. I would say watch it if you're just very curious, but I would not like bend over backwards for it. I had to rent it on Amazon, but I had some of those promotional credits you get when you choose Amazon Day for your shipping.
Yeah.
You know,
right.
I'll usually use those to rent movies that I don't have access to otherwise. So that's how I watched S. Darko. So at least I didn't pay anything for it, but I would say watch it as a curiosity if you really want, if you just need to know. It's not it's not so bad that you're going to feel like you wasted your time. It's not boring. I was never bored by it. I was always interested in where things were going. It's just a little bit stupid. So
in a bit of not really, I don't know if this is serendipity, honestly, but it's just randomly, as you were saying that, I was like, what has this guy been doing? Has he at least produced something? So I just like had pulled him up on IMDb. I was just like, surely there was something. And no, he really has not. But one thing I did notice on there that because I even went to his trivia just real quick. I was like, saying he's working on anything weird like that. And earlier when we were talking about the script for Donnie Darko and like how they wanted to turn it into a horror movie, my first thought, I kid you not, I was like, it feels like back in that time where they were just really trying to pump something out, like they wanted to do Valentine, and so they're like, oh, here's this movie, and it says he was at one point approached to direct Valentine in 2001. I was like,
how about that?
Son of a bitch. Look at that.
Well, Kelly, it should be noted when we're talking about S. Darko that Kelly had nothing to do with it. So he can't be blamed for that. So he didn't have anything. It was around the time that he was making Southland Tales. It was the same. It came out, or I'm sorry, The Box. They came out the same year, 2009. He sold his ownership rights to Donnie Darko when he sold Donnie Darko. So he was 24 years old. So he doesn't even make royalties off of this movie. Now, to this day, he doesn't make any money off of this movie.
Did he just, I don't know, did he just get his bag that he wanted and was just like, I'm out?
I think, I don't know. I really don't. Like, you talking about why he's disappeared?
Yeah, because it just seems unfair that like a guy who does have a legitimate cult classic can at least like do something.
Yeah.
You know?
I don't know. It's weird. I mean, even his other movies have been disappointing to box office wise. They both have their followings, but it feels weird that he wouldn't at least be able to do something small. But I don't know. There's something. It's weird. Donnie Darko, when back on our old show, to reference episodes that people can't really get, we did a Donnie Darko episode. Remember, we did that One Hit Wonders series where we did directors who only had one hit. And we chose Richard Kelly. Like we did Night of the Hunter because Charles Lawton literally did one movie, but we did this one because it's like, well, he did two other movies and nobody gave a shit. And then he just disappeared. So like he is sort of a one-hit wonder. But you have to wonder why that is. Like it was this just a lightning in a bottle thing? I do think that there's an urgency to Donnie Darko that could only exist in a film made by someone as young as Kelly was when he made this. And I know 25 is hardly a child. I know I called him a 25-year-old kid earlier, but that's just me being an old man. I know Orson Welles made Citizen Kane when he was 25, and I know Steven Spielberg made Jaws when he was 26. But I think we can all agree that Orson Welles and Steven Spielberg are not like the norm that anyone should compare themselves to.
Right.
Or you're just going to feel like a piece of shit. But 25 is still young enough to, I think, to really remember what it was like to be a teenager and to remember the angst of your teenage years and the kind of shittiness of high school. Because high school's shitty for most people. People, you go through a hard time. You are hormonal and cranky, and everyone seems to be shitting on you. Like it kind of sucks to be the age that Donnie is in this movie. And Donnie himself, like Donnie's a mess. The character of Donnie Darko is a mess. He's clearly got some mental health issues beyond what regular teens deal with, but he's also got all of this anger that comes along with being a regular old horny, hormonal, emotional teenager. He has to deal with like these bullies who pick on him and adults who don't seem to understand him. But I do think that is why this movie connected so much to younger audiences when it was released back in 2002, 2003, when it came out on DVD, especially. And I asked you earlier how old you were when you saw it, because I felt like I was at the perfect age to love Donnie Darko. Like I saw it when it was pretty new on DVD, so I had to be 22 or 20, maybe probably about 22 when I saw this. Maybe I could have been 21, but that's when I was kind of a budding film buff, and like a lot of budding film buffs at that time in the early 2000s, I became obsessed with it. I explored the mythology via message boards, and there was also this website that Kelly had built for it that had like a lot of stuff about the philosophy of time travel and all of the theories.
Yeah.
It was kind of like this post Blair Witch kind of thing where the website was presented as like a legit website. I bet it's on archive.org. I didn't look, but I should. But I thought that was super cool, and I loved the movie when it first came out. I still do. But watching it as someone like in my 40s, I feel like it's a very different experience than it was when you watch it in your 20s. It's no less rewarding. It's just very different. I've had at this point more than 20 years to process this film. I like I said before, I still don't fully understand it, but I do think that's part of the beauty of it. This is a movie that has layers and layers and layers of things going on, which is what sparks a lot of people's interest in it. But it's also fundamentally got a good structure to stand on. Like its momentum moves forward in a way that you can follow it. So even when it's confusing, it's not off-putting because you don't get so confused to the point where you're like, I give up on this. You can kind of keep track of what's happening. And then you add all of so you've got that cool structure and all the weird stuff on top of it, all the time travel and science stuff. And then you add all the teenager stuff, all the high school stuff, the dark underbelly of suburbia. You add all that and the 80s new wave shit and all that. And then, you got a stew going. And it's just the perfect amalgamation of all these things that somehow, for some reason, speak to people. And maybe that's why it's been hard for him to recreate that, because it is like lightning in a bottle, So it's a really weird, unique combination of things that shouldn't work altogether, and they, for some reason, did work for people on this one. And maybe he's been trying, like with the box and especially Southland Tales, to try to create something else like that and just hasn't been able to do it. I don't know.
It's interesting to think about because it feels like he should be able to, I don't know, unless he just doesn't have other ideas. I did read one article that was like from 2023 with him, and he was there for a screening of something, probably Donnie Darko. Who knows?
Probably.
But he did act like he still had stuff he was thinking about.
Right.
And it feels like, I mean, I haven't read about bad experiences with him or anything. So you'd almost think like, Jake Gyllenhaal, The Rock, Justin Timberlake, like all these guys have pull, in Hollywood, you would think, and could maybe help produce something if they believed in it, So I don't know. It's just weird. It seems like he should be able to get something made if he, settles in on a story or something, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I listened to that interview. There's a podcast I sent it to you called Script Apart, and they interview screenwriters. It's a really great podcast. But I was listening to the Richard Kelly one. I mean, they were specifically talking about Donnie Darko, but that interview took place in like late 2022, so it wasn't that long ago. So pretty recent. I was really hoping that they would get into like, where the hell you been? What are you doing? What are you working on? And all he mentioned was that he has an idea for a Donnie Darko sequel, and that he's talked to Jake Gyllenhaal, but he didn't really go into anything else about what he's been doing with himself, And I would love to hear that. I'd love to hear the full story from Kelly about why he disappeared. Like, I like to think that maybe he's just a prolific script doctor or something, and so he's still getting paid to write. His name's just not popping up as much, and maybe he's happy being out of the limelight and doing that. I don't know. I have a hard time believing that the guy who made Donnie Darko would have difficulties getting a movie off the ground, especially regardless of the fact, that Southland Tales and The Box underperformed. I mean, but they've both kind of got cult followings now. So it's weird that, like, in the age of streaming, you would think that someone like Shudder or somebody could get a lower budget version of what he wants to do off the ground, right? I don't know. Yeah. Or maybe Donnie Darko was just this lightning in a bottle phenomenon. Maybe it was just the perfect combination of all these obsessions that Kelly had that gelled into something just weird enough to be provocative, but not so weird as to turn people off. I mean, maybe it was just at a time when, film discussion on the internet was growing. So it got people talking about it in a way that they might not do now, because we're now at social media. Then it was like message boards. It felt a little more personal, not to sound like an old man, but either way, I think that what Kelly crafted with Donnie Darko is something really special. It's very unique. It's unlike anything else out there. It is a weird movie that somehow struck a chord with people. Now, can I explain it? No, I can't sit down and explain the plot of Donnie Darko to you, not in a way that is sufficient, at least. But sometimes, like we said before, a movie is less about logic and more about feeling it, less about being able to explain its plot intellectually, and more about just like, just vibing with it. It's a vibe movie, like you said. Yeah, and I think that's yeah, and I think that's totally fine. I'm good with that. Gary, unless you have anything else to add, I think that's a wrap on Donnie Darko.
Oh, Donnie, it's been good while it lasted. I'm glad You know, I mean, I could have bitched more about time travel, I guess, but it didn't hit me that hard this time.
Yeah, well, there's a lot, it's got all the weird alternate universe stuff and things like that. So there's always a way to get around that time travel
Yeah,
shit.
you gotta write it off. It's definitely not like a linear timeline.
Right. Exactly. So, well, let's talk about what we're doing on our next episode. We are not going to our next series quite yet. We have one more standalone episode that we're going to do first. But this standalone episode kind of ties into some of the other series that we've had. So remember back when we started our Alejandro Jodorowsky series, we were like, we're going to kind of explore the history of the midnight movies. You've got your El Topos, your Pink Flamingos, but we're doing David Lynch next. I think we've already announced that. If we haven't, consider this the announcement. But before we get to that, where we'll of course talk about Eraserhead, which is kind of the last one of that movement. There's one film that if you're talking about midnight movies, what we kind of did with John Waters and Jodorowsky was we explored the filmographies of these people whose careers began with a movie that became part of that midnight movie phenomenon, created the cult movie as we know it, basically. David Lynch is going to be the same way. But there's one movie that, like, if you're talking about the history of midnight movies, that you just can't skip. Even though we're not going to talk about it, we're not going to do a series on its director or anything like that. But it's a movie that you just got to talk about if you're talking about midnight movies, because it's arguably the most famous midnight movie of all time. And so before we start our David Lynch series, we are going to talk about this movie, one of my favorite movies, the Rocky Horror Picture Show. And we are finally doing it. We're finally doing a Rocky Horror Picture Show. It's going to be fun. There's so much information about it, so I'm a little intimidated. But
how much musical stuff do we get to do?
Not enough. I mean, we did Little Shop of Horrors. We did Hairspray. I think that's it, right? Yeah. So Rocky Horror Picture Show. And then 2 weeks after that, we will be talking about Mr. David Lynch for the next several months, probably. It's going to be a while.
Yeah.
But anyway,
so this will be as easy going as it gets before David Lynch hits.
Yeah. So if you haven't seen Rocky Horror Picture Show, very easy to find. Check it out. Watch it along with us. And that's all I got for today, Gary. Where can you be found on the internet for our lovely listeners?
I am This is Gary Horne on all the social medias.
And I am at Justin_Bishop. You can find the show at cinema_shock or at cinemashock.net, where you can find links to our Discord, our merch, all of our episodes, of course. I am also going to start a Cinema Shock newsletter. So hopefully by the time this episode drops, we will have a little sign up there on our website, because sometimes it's hard to fight through all the bullshit on the Instagram and Facebook algorithm. And, a newsletter lets us get directly to you. We won't annoy you, I promise. It'll be like announcements, and that's pretty much it. I don't have time to spam anybody, honestly. So we just want to make sure when new stuff is out. Oh, and like, rate, and review, and all that. All the stuff. All the stuff to do. Right?
Go subscribe to our YouTube channel. We're uploading. Stuff
we're
there
on YouTube now. Yeah, we're on. Like it's just the same episodes, but if you prefer to listen to your podcast via YouTube, which apparently a lot of people do, you can find us on there now.
All right. Anyway, may the wings of liberty never lose a feather,
and be excellent to each other.